Chapter 1287. Mu Ling was very persistent. No matter how Han Yunxi tried to persuade her, she insisted that they return to Yuning to learn cooking from Granny Zhao and take care of Han Yunxi. She actually forgot all about her debts and the fact that she had to plant medicinal herbs in the snowy mountains. Han Yunxi had no choice but to ask shopkeeper Luo to press for Mu Ling's debts in private. She also disabled the gold card and made it useless. Only then did Mu Ling give up and obediently stay in the barracks to wait for Jin Zi to come back and deal with the debt. Before leaving, Han Yunxi left Mu Ling with a sentence. She said, "Ling you're not young anymore. You should live for yourself." Han Yunxi left him with these words before leaving. Mu Ling stood in a daze for a long time in the howling north wind. When she was young, she lived for her father's orders and for the glory of the Mu family. In those years, she chased after Chi brother everywhere. She had been busy with all kinds of matters in Medicine City. If any of her friends were in trouble, she would be the first to help. Live for herself? She had never thought about this question. Now that Han Yunxi had explained it to her, she didn't really understand. However, she didn't know why, but she felt as if a certain part of her heart was being pulled. It didn't hurt, but it was uncomfortable and blocked. She stood there for a long time before returning to the barracks. Just as she was about to enter, she suddenly heard someone call her from behind. "Mu Ling." She turned around and saw Jin Zi riding on a horse. His face was covered in dust, and his clothes and hair were messed up by the strong wind. The sky was dark and the north wind was rampant. The entire grassland was dark and gloomy. Jin Zi's black clothes almost merged with the dark sky. Mu Ling felt like she was dreaming. It was a dream about the edge of the world and the end of time. It must be a dream. Jin Zi was far away at the western border. How could he be here? She hadn't dreamed of anyone for a long time. Her dreams were always empty. Why did this annoying fellow barge in? She clearly wanted a dream of her big brother, Shao Qi. Not only did he disturb her in real life, he even dared to intrude into her dreams like a haunting ghost. He was really very annoying. Mu Ling ignored him and turned around. As soon as they entered the tent, the whole world suddenly became bright and warm. Mu Ling also became much more awake. She thought that she must have been hallucinating. But who knew that just as she sat down, Jin Zi walked in. Mu Ling was stunned. Only then did she completely sober up. She blurted out, Why are you back? You should have just arrived at the border." Jin Zi came back halfway, because he suddenly realized that if Han Yunxi was really pregnant, he would not stay in Longfei Yi for long. The winter in Northernly was not easy. With Mu Ling's personality, she would definitely follow him back. Therefore, he gave the map to Su Donglin and returned. "You are still not leaving?" Jin Zi asked in return. Mu Ling did not understand for a moment. Jin Zi added, "Your sister has already left. Why are you still here?" Mu Ling was originally feeling a little down. But after Jin Zi asked this question, her anger surged. She said coldly, "You haven't returned my gold card? How am I going to leave? Do you think I'm willing to stay here? Let me tell you, Chinquan Bank has already come to collect the debt from me. Do as you see fit. Someone will return the gold card to you in a few days. Someone will also arrange for the debt to be paid at the end of the month. I will also help you pay the interest from Chinquan Bank." As Jin Zi said this, he purposely opened the door and opened it. "You can leave now." Mu Ling felt stifled. She did not know what to say. She wanted to leave immediately, but she thought for a long time before she remembered about the snow mountain. Yes, she still had to go up the snow mountain to plant herbs. Her sister did not want her to take care of her, so of course she had to quickly plant the herbs. She could either buy them from the black market or use them as collateral for Chinquan Bank. If not for this, even if her sister did not want her to take care of her, she would have left long ago and returned to Medicine City. Mu Ling explained herself in her heart. She felt a little more confident and asked in return, Why did you come back?" "I forgot to take something," Jin Zi said coldly. "Oh," Mu Ling answered loudly. Then, the two of them fell silent again. Jin Zi hardened his heart and asked again, "You're still not leaving?" He really did not expect her to stay. He wanted to ask her why, like a madman, but if he asked, it would sound like he was chasing her away. You're still not leaving? Aye. Mu Linger hesitated. Jin Zi unconsciously furrowed his brows, waiting for her answer. Unfortunately, Mu Linger did not give him an answer, but a goodbye. She said, "Who said I'm not leaving? I just forgot to take something. I'm leaving now. Goodbye." Of course, she would leave the army camp, but she would not leave northernly. She left after saying that, striding past Jin Zi and out the door. Jin Zi was stunned. He stood there, motionless. The tent was brightly lit and the stove was warm, but his body was gradually becoming colder. He had rushed back day and night, riding a horse at full speed. He allowed the wind to pour into his clothes and into his body. It was so cold that he lost all feeling in his body. But that was not as cold as the coldness he felt at this moment. After a long time, he turned his head and saw the vast grassland outside the door. It was gloomy and bleak, without any light or end in sight. He began to think about Mu Linger's question. Why did he come back? To keep her? But he clearly did not. A year had already passed. What did he want to do by forcing her to come here? He clearly knew that she hated him. He clearly knew that he would not force her to marry him. If he wanted to, he would have done so a year ago. Now that he had forced her to come here, what could he do? Jin Zi took out the gold card and looked at it silently. Actually, he had always carried this gold card with him. He could return it to her at any time. He looked at it for a long time before handing the gold card to the servant. He said calmly, "Go to the bank and pay off all the money in this card." "Yes." The servant asked, "Master, then this card, you don't want it anymore?" Jin Zi stared at the servant and did not answer for a long time. The servant felt his hair stand on end. He did not know whether to say or not. He was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. In the end, Jin Zi did not say whether he wanted the card or not. He just turned and left. The servant looked at the gold card in his hand with a confused expression. Lord Jin's thoughts were the most difficult to guess. What should he do? Jin Zi rushed to the border that day and did not ask about Mu Linger's whereabouts. A few days later, the servant went to the underground bank and transferred a sum of money to Heaven and Earth Bank. Heaven and Earth Bank lifted the ban on the gold card. The servant brought it back, but didn't know what to do with it. After struggling for 3 days and 3 nights, he finally secretly put the gold card under Lord Jin's pillow. Half a month later, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi returned to Yuning Palace. Gu Beiwe also brought Rui back from Medical City. Han Yunxi began her happy days of nurturing her baby. However, Rui had no choice but to sleep in separate beds from them. After all, Rui slept in a different bed. It would be a big problem if he kicked his mother's belly. At first, Rui wasn't happy and made a fuss for 2 nights. Later on, Rui stopped making a fuss. Every night, when the Grand Tutor wanted to leave the palace, he would follow and stay in the Grand Tutor's residence at night. Gu Beiwe did not return to Medical City, so the matter at Medical City was delayed. Mu Linger did not return to Medicine City, so the matter at Medicine City was also delayed. The matters at Medical City and Medicine City were not urgent. After all, Long Fei Yi had to fill the national treasury first before he could touch Medical City and Medicine City. Mu Linger did not return to Medicine City. Since Lil Thing had nothing to do, it ran back to Yuning City. Once it came back, would have company and would not return to the palace with Grand Tutor Gu. He forced his imperial father and imperial mother to come to the Grand Tutor's residence to accompany him several times. Rui was actually just throwing a tantrum. As long as his imperial father and imperial mother came, he would be overjoyed and would definitely return to the palace with them that night. He also did not want his imperial mother to sleep with him. Instead, he relied on his imperial father. In the end, Long Fei Yi had no choice but to put 2 beds in the palace. Because of Rui and Lil Thing, the originally quiet Grand Tutor's residence became lively. The livelier it was, the more Han Yunxi missed Qin Min. She was also more curious about what had happened between Qin Min and Gu Beiwe. She and Long Fei Yi only knew that Qin Min was most likely faking her pregnancy. However, they really could not guess the truth between Qin Min and Gu Beiwe. Han Yunxi wanted to ask him about Qin Min multiple times, but she held back the words as they reach her lips. After all, Gu Biyue's attitude in Ningzhou City made it difficult for her to ask too many questions. After all, that was Gu Biyue's family matter. A month later, Jin Zi, Su Donglin, and the people sent by the Supreme Court found out about the illegal salt. They arrested the people who were escorting the salt at the secret passage between Northern Li and Winter Crow. At the same time, they found some evidence of the three great clans colluding with Winter Crow's human trafficker, Lu Zhang. The three great clans had indeed colluded with Lu Zhang to occupy the secret passage and smuggle other goods to the mysterious continent. However, they had not acted on it yet. Long Fei did not personally appear in the trial, nor did he expose East Origin Palace. He let the Supreme Court Chancellor preside over the case. After a month of trial, the Chancellor convicted shopkeeper Chao and many people from the three great clans. At the same time, he also arrested a large number of officials. Because the three great clans' patriarchs were not directly involved in the case, they were not convicted and could only be considered as being implicated. However, Long Fei used this case to eliminate many of the three great clans' influence in the Great Qin's officialdom. At the same time, he took back the Chongning salt pans and took the opportunity to take over the other salt pans. It could be said that this case completely reversed the situation in Jiangnan. From then on, there were no more wealthy clans in Jiangnan that could rival a nation. It was also from this year that the Great Qin's treasury became more and more abundant. It was worth mentioning that the Supreme Court Chancellor did not know where the evidence given to him by the emperor came from. A few vice-chancellors personally interrogated shopkeeper Chao to find out who he was transporting the salt to. In the end, shopkeeper Chao did not reveal the young lord of East Origin Palace. He knew that the death penalty was unavoidable. Before he died, he still hoped that the young lord of East Origin Palace would treat his family and clansmen well. As for the three young masters, they did not dare to confess, because once they did, the three great clans would be punished even more severely. The buyer of the salt became the final mystery. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi would probably never reveal the truth in this lifetime. Because of this, only Han Yunxi knew that the young lord of East Origin Palace had a homosexual fetish. After the case was over, Jin Zi was exhausted. He returned to the army camp and fell asleep on his pillow. Tomorrow, Linger's story would be opened. Chapter 1288. Jin Zi returned to his tent from the border and fell asleep as soon as he hit the bed. The smuggling case had nothing to do with him at all. He didn't know what had gone wrong with his head, but he'd risked his life to help Su Donglin and the justice courts capture the culprit. Unfortunately, he hadn't gotten any information on Ning Cheng this time. He wanted nothing more than to rush to Lu Zheng's lair and arrest him for interrogation. Unfortunately, violence wasn't his strong suit. He'd urged Su Donglin to capture the culprit multiple times, but Su Donglin didn't dare to act rashly despite his intentions. Lu Zheng was from Winter Crow country, so it was legal to sell slaves there and on the mysterious continent. Thus, Great Qin couldn't convict him of any crime. As for Lu Zheng's collusion with the three great clans of Jiangnan, there was evidence, but Winter Crow country refused a hand over the culprit. Great Qin's laws couldn't punish them either. The imperial court could only ban Lu Zheng and the others from entering the Great Qin Empire. Once they stepped into the Great Qin Empire, they would be killed without mercy. Actually, Long Fei didn't care about Winter Crow country at all. He once considered using this as an excuse to send troops to Winter Crow country and annex it. But in the end, Han Yunxi stopped him from doing so. For one thing, sending troops to Winter Crow country would only leave them with rumors of the strong bullying the weak. For another, Lu Zheng's background was complicated. His businesses had many connections with the mysterious continent, so it wouldn't be worth it if conflict broke out between Cloud Realm and the mysterious continent because of this. Chu Shifeng was left behind at Winter Crow country to investigate Jin Zi's origins and Ning Cheng's whereabouts. His colleagues were also investigating Lu Zheng's business dealings with the mysterious continent, as well as his own family's power. Jin Zi only wanted Ning Cheng's whereabouts, so he could only wait. Jean Z laid on the pillow and slept for 1 day and 2 nights. God knows how tired he was. On the morning of the third day, he raised his head in a daze. His short hair was messy like a bird's nest, and his bangs were all sticking up. His pair of cold eyes were completely exposed. It had to be said that his eyes were really, really beautiful, especially when he looked sleepy and confused at this time. He didn't have the usual coldness, but had the cuteness of a big brother next door. He reached out to rub his messy hair and lay back on the pillow lazily. He had been busy for so long, and now that he woke up after a good night's sleep, he suddenly didn't need to be busy anymore. He was a little unused to it. He stared blankly at the empty tent. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes suddenly became sluggish, as if he had lost his soul. After a long time, he finally came back to his senses. He rubbed his hair with all his might, messing it up completely. He got up. His movement was not small, and the pillow was thrown to the ground. He was about to lie down to pick it up when he caught a glimpse of a gold card lying quietly on the bed. It's him, her gold card. All of Cloud Realm Continent's gold cards had the same front, but the back was different. The gold card in front of him was facing up, but he recognized it at first glance. After all, he had hidden it in his robes for a year. He picked it up and flipped it to the back, only to see that it was right. He looked and thought. Suddenly, he threw the gold card out, and it hit the pillar in the middle of the tent. He got off the bed, tidied himself up, and left the house. He didn't know where he went, but after a busy day, it was already the middle of the night by the time he returned. The tent was so big, but the gold card was so small. Still, he saw it as soon as he entered the tent. "Someone come," he said coldly. A servant immediately entered. "Your Excellency Jean, what orders do you have? Have you paid off all the debts this Excellency owes?" Jean Z asked icily. "All paid off," the servant replied honestly. "And the interest?" Jean Z asked next. "All paid off as well," the servant replied. Jean Z stared at the card on the pillar and asked again, "And the card? Did you return it too?" The servant didn't see the card hit the pillar, but he was alarmed. So his master wanted to return the card to Miss Linger. "Your servant put the card under your Excellency Jin's pillow. Your servant will go get it right away," the servant said anxiously. Jean Z said expressionlessly. The servant hurried to the bed, but couldn't find the card even after searching under the pillow for a while. He picked up the pillow, only to see that it was empty. "What?" The servant was frightened. "When your Excellency Jean wasn't here, he'd come every day to clean the tent and make the bed once every 2 or 3 days. Yesterday, when he came to change out the blankets, he even took a look and saw that the card was still lying under the pillow. How come today?" Frightened, the servant began to search all over the bed, but he couldn't find a trace of the card even after lifting the covers. "Your Excellency Jean, did you?" he wanted to ask, but swallowed the words back in the end. If your Excellency Jean saw the card again, he would have returned it long ago. Why would he ask so many questions? He thought that your Excellency Jean must have asked because he didn't see it. "Your Excellency Jean, your servant really put the card under the pillow, but now..." The servant was so anxious that he was about to cry. But now it's gone. Gone. Jean Z looked at him coldly. "Please spare my life, your Excellency Jean. Your servant definitely didn't embezzle the card. Even if I had a huge order, I wouldn't dare to do so. Please understand, your Excellency Jean." The servant knelt down and begged. Jean Z was still expressionless as he said coldly, "If it's gone, then so be it. Go and tell Mu Ling, to go to Kingan Bank and get her banned from using the card. This matter ends here." The servant was very surprised. He didn't expect that your Excellency Jean didn't blame him for such a huge matter. Yes. Just as the servant was about to run out, Jean Z added, "You better find Mu Ling as soon as possible and ban that card. Otherwise, if it's misused, all the debts will be on your head." The servant was so frightened that his heart almost jumped out his chest. He turned around and ran, immediately using all the resources at his disposal to find Mu Ling. That night, 4 letters were sent by Eagle, 1 to Medical City, Medicine City, Yunning City, and Pill Fiend Pharmacy. After the servant left, Jean Z glanced up at the gold card hanging from the pillar and went to sleep. Several days later, the The servant still hadn't received any news from Mu Ling. He knelt by the pillar with tears and snot running down his face, begging Jin Zi for advice. Your Excellency Jin, you will definitely find Miss Ling. Please have mercy. Your Excellency Jin. Your Excellency Jin, Miss Ling isn't in Medical City, Medicine City, or Yuning City. She's not in Pill Fiend Pharmacy either. Your Excellency Jin, please give this humble one some directions. Jin Zi murmured, she hasn't returned to Medicine City. The servant shook his head. This humble one has asked the Mu clan twice. They all said that Miss Ling hasn't returned since she went north last time. Jin Zi suddenly frowned. The servant hurriedly continued. Medical City asked Vice Academy Head Shun, and Yuning City asked Grand Tutor Gu. They all said that they haven't seen her. Before Jin Zi could say anything, the servant hurriedly added, this humble one will go ask the people in Medicine Ghost Valley. However, 2 days later, the steward of Medicine Ghost Valley replied, saying that Mu Ling hadn't been to Medicine Ghost Valley for more than 2 years. That night, Jin Zi couldn't sleep. The next day, he received a handwritten letter from Han Yunxi, questioning him about Mu Ling's whereabouts. Han Yunxi had always thought that Mu Ling was staying in the northernly barracks, waiting for Jin Zi to return so that they could plant medicine in the snowy mountains together. After reading the letter, Jin Zi came to a realization and immediately rushed out of the tent. At this time, the sky was dark and gloomy, and the entire grassland was covered in heavy snow. Jin Zi looked into the distance, but he couldn't see the snowy mountains in the distance. Jin Zi angrily kicked a stone at his feet and angrily said, Mu Ling, how stupid can you be? The snowy mountains in the northern part of Northern Li were continuous, each taller and steeper than the last. Many of them had yet to be climbed, so they were revered as sacred mountains by the local herdsmen. In the northern part of Northern Li, there were many activities to worship the mountain gods and snow gods every winter. Only a few of these snowy mountains were suitable for growing medicinal herbs, while many of them hid many precious wild medicinal herbs that had yet to be excavated. In the past, Junisia had developed 3 snowy mountains to grow medicinal herbs, all of which were in the northwestern part of Northern Li, bordering Winter Crow. The mountains weren't steep, but they were very high. The mountainside was covered in snow all year round, so it wasn't easy to climb up or down a mountain. According to Jin Zi's understanding, the medicinal herbs that Junisia and the Mu clan had jointly planted were very rare and very special. They could only survive in the snow. In other words, those medicinal herbs were distributed on the mountainside of the snowy mountains. It was soon going to be the coldest time in Northern Li. In a few days, there would be several days of heavy snow. When that time came, not to mention going up and down the snowy mountains, even going out would be difficult. Although those 3 snowy mountains had been opened up by Junisia, it was still very dangerous for Mu Ling to go alone. Not to mention that the mountain roads were difficult to traverse. Just the wolves and snow leopards on the mountain were impossible to guard against. Those ferocious beasts couldn't find any prey in the cold weather, so once they saw a person, they would all pounce over to fight for food. It would be strange if Mu Ling didn't get torn apart. The more Jin Zi thought about it, the uglier his face became. He suddenly blew a sharp whistle to summon the big white tiger. But who would have thought that the big white tiger that would usually rush over when he gave the order actually didn't appear? Jin Zi blew again, but the big white tiger still didn't appear. He was shocked and personally ran to the tiger camp near his tent. He saw that the tent that he had specially prepared for the big white tiger was empty, with nothing inside. Where's the tiger? He coldly questioned. I haven't seen it for several days. It should be in the mountains, the guard timidly replied. Big White was the leader of the tiger troops. The tiger troops were all hidden in the nearby hills, and only Big White lived in the military camp. Usually, Big White would run into the mountains and forests, so it was normal for it to not return for an entire month. Apart from Lord Jean, no one else in the army dared to approach Big White, nor did they dare to care about its whereabouts. They were only responsible for delivering roasted meat to Big White every day. Faced with the angry and anxious Lord Jean, the guard was very confused. A complicated look flashed across Jean Z's eyes. Coldly, he said, "I'll be away for a while, so I'll leave the military matters to the deputy generals." After giving his instructions, Jean Z went into the mountains. After asking around, he found out that Big White wasn't in the forest. That day, he brought 10 white tigers and went straight to the snowy mountain herb fields. Chapter 1289. Mu Ling was indeed in the snowy mountain medicine fields. The 3 snowy mountains in the western part of northern Li were connected together. All 3 of them ran north and south in a straight line, forming a wall between northern Li and Winter Crow country. The entire mountain range was called the Jiaxin Mountain Range. From south to north, each mountain was taller than the last. Jun Yixie and the Mu clan had worked together to open up large patches of ice and snow medicine fields on the mountainsides of the 3 snowy mountains. But only the first snowy mountain had been planted for a season, while the other 2 were still abandoned. Originally, after Han Yunxi and Medicine Ghost Valley had joined forces to monopolize all the medicine sold in Medicine City, Jun Yixie and Cloud Realm Trade Consortium had planned to develop the medicine fields on the snowy mountains. But that plan had ended before it could even begin. Mu Ling, who had been staying on a mountainside for half a month now, accompanied by the still missing Big White. Big White had been following her ever since she left the army camp. She was planning to return to Medicine City and wait until summer to explore the snowy mountains again. However, seeing that Dub I was following her around, she became restless. After preparing for 3 days, she brought Big White to the snowy mountains. She had already learned from the Mu clan that the Mu clan and Jun Yixie were working together to develop the medicine fields on the snowy mountains. Their main goal was to grow snow jade cordyceps. Snow jade cordyceps was an extremely precious medicinal ingredient that was almost extinct among all the other cordyceps. As one of the best wild, nourishing medicinal ingredients, snow jade cordyceps were crazily sought after by countless nobles. Unfortunately, the number of such ingredients had dwindled over the past 10 years. It was already considered a lot to harvest 10 cordyceps each year. The rarity of snow jade cordyceps had something to do with its formation. That's right, this type of medicinal ingredient wasn't simply grown, but formed. Every winter, a type of ginseng called snow ginseng would grow on the snowy mountains. This type of ginseng was buried deep in the snow and was extremely small. The largest of them was only as big as a child's pinky finger. In the spring of the next year, a group of beautiful butterflies would fly to the snowy mountains. Each of them was as big as a palm, and their bodies were like white jade. They were clean and flawless, so they were called jade butterflies. The jade butterfly laid eggs in the snow, and after the baby jade butterfly was born, it would burrow into the snow to find the roots of the snow ginseng and eat it. When the baby jade butterfly ate the snow ginseng, most of them would freeze to death in the snow. As a result, the corpses of the snow ginseng and the baby jade butterfly would grow together. In the early winter of the next year, they would grow into a snow jade cordyceps that was both a plant and an animal. How did the jade butterfly cub and the snow ginseng grow together? No one knew the reason behind this. However, it took the Mu family and Jun Yixie 3 years to figure out where the snow jade cordyceps came from. Jun Yixie died, and the Mu family was defeated. This secret fell into the hands of Mu Ling. In order to obtain more snow jade cordyceps, Jun Yixie and the Mu family cultivated the snowy mountain herb field. In the winter, they artificially planted large amounts of snow ginseng for the jade butterflies to lay eggs. They even began to research how to attract more jade butterflies to the herb field, as well as how to raise them. However, before they could even try, the cooperation was broken. Mu Ling also wanted to see what the jade butterflies looked like. It would be best if she could catch a few and raise them. Thus, with Dubbai's protection, she resolutely decided to take the risk and climb the snowy mountain. The jade butterflies would only appear for a few days in the early spring. At that time, the snow would melt, so it was impossible to climb the mountain. Thus, if she wanted to see the jade butterflies, she could only spend the winter on the snowy mountain and wait until spring. In fact, Mu Ling was not impulsive. After all, the Mu family and June Isia had cooperated before. She also understood the situation on the snowy mountain herb field. Not only did she bring Dabai, but she also brought a lot of food and daily necessities. The tall Dabai seemed to have become her horse. Not only did he have to carry her, but he also had to help her carry a lot of things. Mu Ling brought a lot of food, a large bedding, several sets of clothes, boots, and even cooking pots and pans. One could imagine how much work Dabai had to do. However, Dabai was very willing. He was especially happy along the way. When they encountered some small beasts, he also turned a blind eye and let them go. There were several abandoned stone houses beside the herb field. Mu Ling found the warmest one and tidied it up. Then, she and Dabai stayed there. Mu Ling stayed for a night before she realized that she had forgotten to bring charcoal. She was so cold that she almost fell sick. Fortunately, she had the habit of carrying medicinal pills with her. She was fine after taking a few pills. She looked around and actually found a large pile of charcoal and firewood in the most remote stone house. There were also many daily necessities. These were probably left behind by the previous herb farmers. The charcoal was used for warmth and the firewood was used for cooking. Just like that, Mu Ling stayed in the snow mountain herb field. After a few days of acclimatization, she dug up a few snow ginseng to study. She even dug up a snow jade cordyceps that hadn't been picked yet. Mu Ling was overjoyed. She yelled in the snow, "Dabai, Dabai, come and see." Dabai lay beside her. He looked lazy and adorable, but in reality, he maintained a high level of vigilance. He knew that there were many wolves, tigers, and leopards on this snow mountain. He originally wanted to follow Miss Ling, and find out where she went before telling his master. However, who knew that Miss Ling would treat him as a horse and bring him up the snow mountain. Miss Ling was the girl that his master risked his life to save. His master must like her very, very much. Thus, he had to protect Miss Ling no matter what. Dabai hurriedly stood up and shook off the snow on his body. He ran over excitedly. Mu Ling placed the small snow jade cordyceps in her palm for him to see. "Look, I found a treasure. This is good stuff." Dabai didn't know what Miss Ling was doing here, nor did he know how precious this small cordyceps was. However, he knew that Miss Ling was very happy. He rubbed his nose against Mu Ling's hand in response. "Here you go. Thank you for your hard work," Mu Ling said earnestly. Dabai glanced at the cordyceps. He didn't seem to be very interested. Mu Ling brought the cordyceps to his mouth. Only then did he use his tongue to roll the small cordyceps into his mouth. He swallowed it without even chewing. After June Isia's partnership with the Mu family was terminated, the cordyceps that were cultivated and wild were all gone. This was because no medicine farmers dared to go up the snow mountain again. If Mu Ling were to buy these cordyceps on the black market, they would definitely be sold for an extremely high price. Even if she didn't buy them, she could still eat them herself. However, she rewarded Dabai just like that, and the silly Dabai simply ate them. When she started, Dabai was also happy. It had nothing to do with value or utility. It was just that simple and pure. There was no need to explain it to outsiders. A few days later, it began to snow heavily. Mu Ling and Dabai hid in the stone house and didn't go out. Mu Ling knew that Dabai was a carnivore, so she specially prepared some cured meat. She clamped a metal rack over the stove and hung the cured meat on top of it to roast. After a while, the cured meat sizzled with oil and exuded an extremely alluring aroma. Dabai wanted nothing more than to pounce on the cured meat and gobble it up. However, he resisted the urge and patiently waited for Miss Ling to finish roasting the cured meat. Mu Ling asked as she roasted the cured meat, "Does that baddie roast meat for you often?" Dabai's mind was completely focused on the cured meat. He didn't understand what she was saying, so he just nodded. "That baddie also likes to eat meat, right?" Mu Ling asked again. Dabai continued to nod. "That baddie is really baddie. I curse him to stuff a piece of meat between his teeth every time he eats." Mu Ling started to mutter to herself. No, I curse him to grow cavities in his teeth and become a vegetarian for the rest of his life. Dabai nodded vigorously. His soul was completely captivated by the aroma of the cured meat. Finally, Dabai couldn't take it anymore and allowed Mu Ling to continue talking. He drooled as he got up and lay down on the stove. Just as Dabai was about to eat all the cured meat in one bite, he suddenly stopped. His eyes, which had been infatuated, immediately turned cold and fierce. He sensed movement outside the house. He immediately jumped down and ran to the door, indicating to Mu Ling that there was danger outside. Mu Ling was alarmed. Something that could cause Dabai to be so vigilant had to be quite dangerous. Along the way to the snowy mountains, many wild beasts would voluntarily make way for Dabai. Normally, it wouldn't be wild beasts that came looking for them. Could it be that someone had come looking for them? Mu Ling was puzzled. She really couldn't think of anyone who would come here. She cautiously lifted the curtain and looked outside. It would have been better if she didn't look, but she was immediately given a fright. Heavens! There was a large pack of snow leopards outside. There were at least 50 of them, and all of them were extremely ferocious. They were all staring at her stone house. What shocked her the most was that there was a woman standing in the pack of snow leopards. Her facial features were well defined, and she was extremely beautiful. Moreover, this woman was dressed like a hunter. Her legs were as wide as her shoulders, and she stood with her arms crossed in front of her chest. She looked extremely domineering. Mu Ling took a closer look and even discovered that there was a dagger at her waist. She had clearly brought the pack of snow leopards here. They were all well trained, and there were 50 of them standing in a very neat formation. Who is she? Mu Ling muttered to herself. She looked toward Dabai and saw that he had already opened his mouth wide, revealing his fangs. Mu Ling couldn't help but ponder a question. If this woman had ill intentions, would Dabai be able to defeat those 50 snow leopards? It had to be said that Mu Ling was a little worried. She thought that even if Dabai could defeat those snow leopards, it would definitely be very difficult. Otherwise, Dabai wouldn't have revealed such an expression. What should she do? Just as Mu Ling was feeling anxious, the woman outside the door shouted, "Hey, listen up, this herb field belongs to me. If you don't want to die, then come out and apologize to me. I'm a great person who won't hold a grudge against you, and I'll spare your life." Mu Ling was initially still worried, but upon hearing this, her anger flared up. She opened the door and walked out with Dabai. Dabai's aura clearly intimidated the 50 snow leopards, and they all retreated. The woman was very surprised, but she quickly regained her composure. She said coldly, "You're just a tiger. How dare you show off in front of me? You're asking for death." Mu Ling was completely baffled. Who on earth came to show off in front of them? Mu Ling was just about to retort when the woman suddenly blew a sharp whistle. Not long after, a large pack of wolves ran out from the forest around the herb field. There were about 100 of them, and they all surrounded them. Mu Ling was dumbstruck. "Dabai, she's trying to cause trouble." Chapter 1290. Due to the addition of the wild wolves, the 50 snow leopards' morale was greatly boosted, and they once again surrounded Mu Ling and Dabai. The wild wolves also quickly closed in on them. Over 150 ferocious beasts formed a large circle, trapping Mu Ling and Dabai in the center. Dabai continued to circle around Mu Ling, not daring to stray too far from her. It stared at the surrounding ferocious beasts and let out a low growl, as if it was warning them. However, the snow leopards and wild wolves were no longer afraid of Dabai, because they had many companions. The snow leopards, standing at the very front, also let out low growls in return. "Howl!" Dabai suddenly let out a loud roar, and only then did the snow leopards become fearful and retreat a few steps. However, they didn't retreat too far, and they continued to stare at Mu Ling and Dabai as if they were prey. Mu Ling was well aware of this situation, and she pulled out the dagger she always carried with her. "Dabai, don't worry about me," she said in a low voice. If Dabai could understand Mu Ling's words, he would definitely scold her for being stupid, just like his master. If it weren't for the fact that he had to protect Mu Ling Dabai wouldn't be afraid, no matter how many ferocious beasts there were. However, with Mu Ling around, his chances of victory were extremely slim. This was because there were too many ferocious beasts, and if he let his guard down, Mu Ling would be bitten to death. This was also the reason why Bai was still circling around Mu Ling and hadn't launched an attack yet. He couldn't leave Mu Ling by even half a step, and he couldn't allow the snow leopards and wild wolves to take advantage of him. "Looks like you don't plan on apologizing to me," the woman shouted arrogantly. Mu Ling shouted back, "Why should I? Who said that this herb field belongs to you?" The woman swept her gaze across the mountain of wild wolves and snow leopards, and she laughed loudly. "If they say it's mine, then it's mine. Why are you being so unreasonable? These medicinal fields were clearly cultivated by my Mu family." Mu Ling retorted angrily. Although Mu Ling was stupid, she was not naive. She was dealing with this woman. Firstly, she wanted to stall for time. Secondly, she wanted to probe this woman's background. Thirdly, she wanted to find a way to reconcile. After all, she couldn't possibly drag Dabai down with her. Mu Clan? Haha, never heard of it. Stinky girl, let me tell you, these things were all stolen. Whoever's fist is harder, the item will belong to them, the woman said arrogantly. Mu Linger blurted out without thinking. "Okay, then let's fight. Whoever loses gets the hell out of here." "You want to fight me?" The woman laughed loudly. "What? You don't dare?" As Mu Linger provoked her, she secretly thought about what kind of rules she should set to trick this woman. After all, she had been tricked by her sister a few times, so she was experienced. However, who would have thought that the woman would leap lightly onto a large rock and leave behind a threat? "Okay, you'll be responsible for your own life and death." Based on this woman's skills, she could probably leave her in the dust. Mu Linger was a little confused, but she quickly asked, "How do we fight?" "Based on our own abilities," the woman said as she pulled out a dagger. A sly look flashed across Mu Linger's eyes as she continued. "You'll be responsible for your own life and death. Your beast is not allowed to seek revenge. You're dead meat," the woman said coldly. "Life and death are one thing, rules are another. Let's talk about the rules first, shall we?" Mu Linger said seriously. "Don't worry, if I really lose to you, I guarantee that they will all retreat. Haha, if you die by my hands, even if that tiger of yours doesn't seek revenge, I will find trouble with it." The woman's tone was extremely arrogant. Mu Linger sucked in a breath of cold air, her anger finally burning. She didn't waste any more words as she pulled out a dagger and pointed it at the woman. "Come." Seeing this, the big white tiger growled at Mu Linger touched the big white tiger's mouth and whispered, "It's fine, don't worry." The woman walked over step by step, and the surrounding snow wolves and wild wolves consciously retreated to the side. Both Mu Linger and the woman were holding daggers. Although Mu Linger only knew a little bit of martial arts, she wasn't afraid. This was because this competition was based on each person's abilities and there were no restrictions. Therefore, she didn't want to fight this woman at all. Soon, the two stood face to face, only a step away from each other. Looking at her from such a close distance, Mu Linger was even more stunned. This woman was really beautiful. "Begin," the woman suddenly shouted and stabbed her dagger. Mu Linger retreated and casually scattered a large amount of powder at the same time. The woman didn't expect this and hurriedly wiped the powder off her face. "What is this?" Mu Linger stared blankly at her without a word. What else could this powder be but poison? Her big sister was the most poisonous woman in Cloud Realm Continent. So how could she not have some skills as her little sister? After leaving Tiger's prison in the past, she and her big sister had brought plenty of poisons with them. The woman wiped her face clean and was about to attack again when her face and hands began to itch unbearably. She had no choice but to toss her dagger aside and scratch herself instead. "You poisoned me. Slut, you're despicable," the woman cursed. "We've already agreed that we'll rely on our own abilities," Mu Linger retorted immediately. "You." The woman clearly didn't expect Mu Linger to have poisons. She quibbled, When this young lady said we'll rely on our own abilities, I meant martial arts, not these kinds of despicable methods. Your martial arts are clearly better than mine. So don't you think you're despicable? You clearly have more beasts than me. So don't you think you're despicable? Mu Linger retorted angrily. You. The woman was easily irritated. Give me the antidote, or else I'll have them bite you to death. If you lose, you have to apologize to me first. Mu Linger said seriously. Don't even think about it. The woman roared back. Are you going to act shamelessly? If you can't afford to lose, then don't play. Mu Linger was even more incensed now. But the woman was actually shameless enough to shout back. So what if this young lady acts shamelessly? Give me the antidote right now and apologize, then scram. Otherwise, I'll make sure your corpse doesn't even exist. Mu Linger was so angry that she felt unwell. She didn't know how to reason with the woman, so she simply shouted back, No, not giving, not giving, not giving. The woman suddenly swiped at her with her claws. Mu Linger tried to dodge as she tried to use her poison. However, the woman's movements were too quick. Her other hand grabbed onto Mu Linger's hand, and she yanked violently, almost dislocating Mu Linger's wrist. Mu Linger was in great pain and couldn't dodge in time. The woman's other hand viciously clawed at Mu Linger's face, leaving behind 2 scars. Mu Linger was dumbfounded. Right at this moment, Dabai suddenly pounced at her at lightning speed. He was so fast that not only was the woman unable to react in time, but the surrounding beasts were also caught off guard. Dabai directly pushed the woman to the ground. He pressed one paw against her body and raised his other paw high up in the air. Just as he was about to swipe at her face, the surrounding beasts all pounced toward Mu Linger. Leopards were far faster than all other beasts. Dabai retreated without hesitation and quickly lifted Mu Linger into the air. The 2 leopards missed their target. Dabai was filled with killing intent. He wanted to bite the 2 leopards to death, but he suppressed his urge. He flew up and caught Mu Linger, allowing Mu Linger to land on his back. Then, he landed on the ground. The woman had already crawled up. Her face was pale from fright. She scratched her face as she pointed at Dabai and Mu Ling. All of you attack. Tear them apart, she roared. In an instant, over 150 beasts swarmed toward them. Dabai and Mu Linger were instantly drowned out by the sea of beasts. The leopards were extremely fast, while the wolves were extremely organized. What was even more frightening was that the woman was still giving out orders. She was speaking a strange language. Mu Linger couldn't understand a word she was saying, but Dabai understood everything. Mu Linger was extremely shocked. Could it be that this woman was also from the Black Tribe? Could it be that she also understood the language of beasts? Dabai was also puzzled. Was this woman from the same tribe as Master? However, he had no time to think about this. He had to protect Miss Linger. The 50 leopards all pounced at the white tiger's back, aiming for Mu Linger. Meanwhile, the 100 or so wolves split into 4 groups to target the white tiger's forelegs. The white tiger was truly fighting 1 against 100. No matter how ferocious Dabai was, he was still outnumbered. He would be drowned by these beasts. Dabai carried Mu Linger on his back. Dabai dodged the attacks of the snow leopards and wolves at lightning speed. At the same time, he pounced on the snow leopards that were attacking Mu Linger. However, all the wolves that managed to bite Dabai died on the spot. This was because Dabai was the leader of the poison corpses that Juni Xie had raised. His entire body was filled with poison. Even his blood was extremely poisonous. The snow leopard's target was Mu Linger. They pounced toward her from all directions. Mu Linger was scared out of her wits. However, at this moment, she was brave. She gripped her dagger tightly and guarded against the snow leopards that could pounce at any moment. Suddenly, 3 snow leopards pounced toward her from the right. Dabai immediately dodged and pounced toward the 3 snow leopards. At the same time, another 5 snow leopards pounced toward Mu Linger. Dabai leaped high into the air and dodged. However, the snow leopards stepped on the wolves and leaped into the air. They pounced toward Mu Linger from above. Mu Linger was so scared that tears flowed out of her eyes. She clenched her teeth tightly and held the dagger with both hands, stabbing it into the air. Dabai couldn't care less about the wolves that were attacking him. After he landed, he immediately pounced to the side. Almost at the same time, the snow leopards pounced on the ground. Attacked together, the woman roared from the side. Her face was already red from her scratches, but she didn't care anymore. In an instant, the group of wolves formed a circle. The snow leopards also formed a circle. Under the woman's command, the circle of snow leopards attacked at the same time. They all stepped on the backs of the wolves and leaped into the air before pouncing down. Dozens of snow leopards pounced down, leaving Dubai and Mu Linger with nowhere to run. Dubai had just dodged one snow leopard when another one pounced on him. He hurriedly dodged the other snow leopard, but the other snow leopard pounced on him again. A few snow leopards scratched the back of Dubai, leaving bloody marks. They were so close to catching Mu Linger. Although many snow leopards were poisoned to death, there were too many of them. In addition, the wolves had also started to imitate the snow leopards. This forced Dubai, who was riddled with injuries, to have no way to escape. Mu Linger's position behind Dubai was getting smaller and smaller. Once she came into contact with Dubai's blood, she would also be poisoned to death. Just as 5 to 6 snow leopards pounced on him at the same time, Dubai suddenly flipped over and threw Mu Linger onto the ground. At the same time, he pounced over and covered Mu Linger in his arms, protecting her tightly. Chapter 1291. As soon as the white tiger wrapped Mu Linger in its arms, all the other beasts stopped attacking and waited for their master's orders. The white tiger's legs and buttocks were covered in claw wounds. Fresh blood had dyed its noble white fur red. It swept its eyes over the rest of the beasts before glaring murderously at the woman standing in the distance. If not for the fact that it had to protect Miss Ling, it would have pounced on her and torn her to shreds. It raised its head and roared a few times at the sky, hoping to summon the other tigers from the forest. Unfortunately, tigers didn't climb the mountains, so it couldn't summon any of its companions. The woman stared at the white tiger from a distance and had long sensed that it was different from the others. She was planning to deal with that damn girl first before figuring out this red-eyed white tiger. Unexpectedly, she discovered that the white tiger's fangs, claws, and blood were all laced with lethal poison. This was a venomous tiger. She had grown up in the mysterious continent's Black Forest, where all the beasts gathered. She had never seen such a venomous tiger before. Could it be that this tiger was unique to Cloud Realm continent? "Awoo! Awoo!" The white tiger howled nonstop at the woman. "What are you howling for? I'm telling you now, even if you don't want the antidote, this young lady will take your lives." The woman suddenly shouted in beast language. In a flash, all the snow leopards and wolves crouched on the ground, ready to attack. Big White understood the woman's orders. She wanted the rest of the beasts to attack and tear it to shreds. Mu Linger hid in Big White's arms and had no idea what the woman had ordered, but she could clearly feel Big White's rage. Just what happened. Suddenly, a snow leopard pounced forward like an arrow. In a flash, all the other snow leopards were out, followed by the pack of wolves. All of them pounced on Big White, scratching and biting it viciously. Although Big White would die from the poison in 1 or 2 bites, they still pounced on it one after the other. With over 100 beasts attacking it, how many wounds would Big White have on its body? How much blood would it lose? Dubai will die. Dubai had no way to retaliate. However, he still held his head up high, like a king looking down on all the other beasts. He still protected Mu Linger well. In fact, he was afraid that Mu Linger would be worried. His body didn't even tremble when his medicine was taken away. Mu Linger smelled the thick scent of blood and heard the howls of many wild beasts nearby. She suddenly realized that Dubai was using his own body to protect her. "No!" Mu Linger shouted. "Don't hurt it. Don't hurt it anymore. I admit defeat. I'll give you the antidote. I'll apologize to you." She shouted with all her might. "Let it go. You can do whatever you want. All of you stop. I'm begging you stop." When the woman heard that, she was overjoyed. Compared to a dead tiger, she preferred a live one. This was the first time she had seen such a venomous tiger. No matter what, she had to bring it back to the Black Forest and show it off. She waved her hand, and all the wild beasts stopped and retreated. A child's intuition was very accurate, and the intuition of animals was also very accurate. Dabai knew that this woman wasn't a good person as soon as he saw her. Even though all the other beasts had stopped attacking, he still protected Mulinger. Mulinger struggled a few times, but Dabai didn't budge. Mulinger obviously knew that this woman wasn't trustworthy and was unreasonable. Even if she apologized, she might not be able to leave safely. However, the situation had already escalated to this point. What else could she do? She could only do her best to protect Dabai and her own life. This trip to the snowy mountains made Mulinger understand one thing even more. Beasts were easy to guard against, but humans were hard to guard against. Mulinger stroked Dabai and said in a low voice, "If this continues, we'll all die. Dabai, be good and move aside." Perhaps Dabai understood Mulinger's words, or perhaps he was comforted by her, but he carefully got up. As if he was afraid that the poisonous blood would hurt Mulinger, he abruptly rolled to the side and let the wounds on his body rub against the snowy ground. He couldn't help but grin and reveal his fangs in pain. Seeing Dabai's torn and bloody body, Mulinger's heart throbbed with pain, and tears immediately fell from her eyes. She pounced over to hug Dabai, but Dabai hurriedly got up in fright and hid far away, looking at her in horror. Mulinger was stunned. Dabai's large, red eyes immediately revealed a look of grievance and distress. He looked at Mulinger and whimpered, as if he was apologizing and crying at the same time. He didn't avoid her on purpose, but he couldn't hug her. Only then did Mulinger come to her senses. She pursed her lips and tried to hold it in, but she couldn't hold it in and started sobbing. Dabai, seeing Mulinger cry, the woman's smile became even more radiant. "Haha, you're crying from this? You're still wet behind the ears. How dare you fight with me? Where's the antidote? Hurry up and give it to me." It could only be said that the poisons Mulinger asked for weren't vicious enough, and the woman she met was quite patient. The itch had already spread to her neck, but she was still able to remain calm. Mulinger tossed the antidote over. The woman said coldly, "Stupid girl, you better not play any tricks. Even if I die here, my beast weapon will be buried with you." Mulinger couldn't be bothered to reply. After the woman took the antidote, the itch disappeared immediately. She was extremely happy. Excellent, excellent. Let's play slowly from now on, shall we? You just want to snow jade cordyceps. I'm a pharmacist. I can help you grow more snow jade cordyceps, Mulinger said coldly. This was the best bargaining chip that she had come up with in a hurry. Hearing this, the woman was even happier. She laughed loudly. "I see. All right, I can let you live, but you still have to apologize to me and say that the herb field belongs to me." Mulinger clenched her fists. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She would rather give up her life than bow down to this woman. However, she couldn't bear to part with Dabai. She still bowed down in the end. She lowered her head and muttered, "I'm sorry. The herb field is yours." The woman looked on with interest and was still dissatisfied. "What did you say? Come over and say it louder. You have to apologize properly. Didn't your parents teach you?" Mulinger lowered her head and walked over. She said mildly, "I'm sorry, the herb field is yours." However, the woman suddenly grabbed her by the hair and forced her to look up. "What's with that attitude? Look at me and say it." "Ow!" Dabai roared. It didn't have its usual aura. It was clearly angry, but it sounded like it was crying. Mulinger hurriedly waved her hands at Dabai, telling him not to move. The woman glanced at Dabai and snorted disdainfully. "So what if you can rear a tiger? You're still defeated by me, aren't you? Heh, repeat what you just said." "I'm sorry. The herb field is yours," Mulinger said loudly. She comforted herself. This wasn't humiliation. She was saving Dabai. The woman tightened her grip and almost tore off Mulinger's hair. She said, "I said that you poisoned me. That's despicable." "I poisoned you. That's despicable," Mulinger yelled. The woman was finally satisfied. "I thought you had some backbone. Turns out you're just a coward. What a bitch." Mulinger's eyes reddened, but she didn't try to defend herself. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. Unexpectedly, the woman went even further. How about this? Say that you're a bitch, and I'll forgive you. Mu Linger immediately glared at her. The woman didn't seem to care. You don't have to say it. I'm not forcing you. Mu Linger stared at the woman. She bit her lip so hard that it was about to bleed. It looks like you don't want to be forgiven. Fine, I won't forgive you. The woman waved her hand, and the surrounding ferocious beasts closed in again. I'll talk. Mu Linger choked up. I'm... The woman waited patiently. Who knew that just as Mu Linger was about to continue speaking, the big white tiger suddenly howled. The surrounding ferocious beasts seemed to have sensed something, and they all looked around in fear. The woman quickly noticed the strange behavior of the group of beasts. She also looked around. As she looked, she suddenly heard a tiger roar from behind her. This tiger roar didn't sound like it was made by a tiger. It sounded more like a human's beast language. The moment this tiger roar sounded, all the wild beasts in the area prostrated themselves, as if they had been tamed in an instant. The woman was shocked. She turned around and saw 10 big, white tigers in a row. They were walking towards her, and on the back of the biggest white tiger in the middle sat a man. His figure was thin, and he was dressed in black. He gave off a cold aura that was even colder than the air on the snowy mountain. Was he the one who let out that tiger roar just now? The woman didn't understand what that tiger roar meant, but she was very sure that it was beast language. That was the most honorable and authoritative voice in the language of beast taming, in the black forest of the mysterious continent. Only this voice could control tigers and all the other beasts. Could it be that this person was... The woman was stunned. She didn't dare to think further. She told herself that he couldn't be. He couldn't be. Mu Linger was still being pulled by her hair. She glanced over and saw that familiar figure from the corner of her eye. It was just a glance, but the tears in her eyes slowly fell. This annoying person could actually find his way here. He could actually... She hated him so much. She didn't want to see him. How could there be a time when she didn't hate him, just like now? Was this a dream? Jean Z looked from afar, his gaze fixed on Mu Linger's hair being pulled. He didn't say anything, but the white tigers could clearly sense his rage. They all sped up, and the wild beasts seemed to have sensed it too. They all trembled. Seeing this, the woman was even more shocked. She suddenly pulled Mu Linger closer and grabbed Mu Linger's neck. She warned, "Don't come over, or I'll kill her." Jean Z jumped down from the tiger's back. His gaze slowly moved to Mu Linger's face. He clearly saw the scratches on her face and her teary eyes. He looked at the woman expressionlessly. His voice was so cold that it could kill. He said word by word, "You made her cry." Chapter 1292. Facing Jean Z's towering rage, the woman's arrogance immediately disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only fear. She looked at Jean Z. Not knowing what was going on, she didn't even have the courage to open her mouth. "Speak," Jean Z suddenly roared. The woman was so frightened that her hands went limp, unconsciously letting go of Mu Linger. Jean Z took the opportunity to pull Mu Ling over, holding her in his arms. He didn't need the woman's answer. Staring at her sinisterly and cold as he sentenced her death, he said, "You're courting death." In a moment, the 10 big white tigers behind him rushed forward, surrounding the woman. The woman had never been afraid of beasts since she was young. Even if she couldn't control the tiger clan, she wasn't afraid of tigers. However, facing the 10 big tigers, she was so frightened that she fell on her but on the ground, crying out, "Ah!" Tear her apart. With Jean Z's order, a big white tiger pounced over, pushing the woman to the ground, aiming to bite her neck. Just at this moment, the woman suddenly let out a strange cry, like a wolf's cry and a leopard's roar, clearly giving an order to the wolf pack and snow leopard. The wolf pack and snow leopard all crawled on the ground, not daring to move. On the contrary, the big white tiger was curious and didn't immediately bite, but turned to look at Jean Z. When Jean Z came and saw so many wild beasts, he already had his suspicions. This woman understood the beast language and controlled so many wild beasts on the snow mountain. She should be a remnant of the Black Clan. So what if the Black Clan still had remnants on the Snow Mountain? He would also kill this woman without a doubt. She actually dared to bully Mu Ling to this extent. How could he tolerate this? One must know that he had always bullied Mu Ling but he had never bullied her to the point of crying. This woman, what right did she have? Seeing the big white tiger stop, Jin Zi kicked the tiger's butt and roared angrily, scaring the big white tiger so much that it didn't dare to delay and immediately opened its mouth to bite down. Seeing that the fangs were about to bite the woman's neck, the woman suddenly shouted, "You must have been kidnapped. I know who you are. I know where you came from. I'm going to die. No one can tell you." As soon as he said this, Jin Zi was stunned. Mu Ling, who was still crying, immediately rushed over and pushed the big white tiger's big mouth away. No, the woman spat out a mouthful of blood, her heart thumping wildly. She had truly escaped from the jaws of death. Mu Ling turned around and looked at Goldie. She saw a complicated look in Goldie's eyes, and he even seemed to be avoiding her gaze. She knew that Jin Zi had been searching for his origins. When this woman appeared, she immediately thought of Jin Zi's background. Mu Ling, who was kneeling at the side, also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She had actually forgotten how badly she had been bullied just now. At this moment, all her thoughts were focused on Jin Zi's background. What really surprised Jin Zi was the word trafficking, right? These two words proved that this woman knew about him, and also proved that this woman was not a member of the Black Clan. Although his indenture contract was in Ning Cheng's hands, he had never been Ning Cheng's slave, but Ning Cheng's friend and partner. He had long been the owner of the three-way black market and did not live the life of a slave. He had always wanted to take back his indenture contract and return to Winter Crow country. First, he wanted to be free and not be restricted by others. Second, he wanted to figure out his origins, find out who he was, and find his parents and family. When he found out that he was born with beast-taming skills in Tiger's prison and could control the Tiger Clan that the Black Clan could not, he knew that he was definitely from an ordinary family. Ning Cheng had once asked him about his childhood memories, but unfortunately, he could not remember any of them. Ning Cheng had said that with his talent, he must have been kidnapped to become a slave. The woman was about to get up, but Jin Zi suddenly stepped on her neck, looking down at her from above. Coldly, he said, "No matter who you are, no matter what you know, apologize to Mu Ling first." God knew how strong Jin Zi's foot was. The woman's face turned red, and she had difficulty breathing. She could not even open her mouth and kept waving at Jin Zi, wanting him to let go of her. Mu Ling looked at Jin Zi's angry side profile. She wanted to speak, but did not dare to. She thought that the last time they parted was when he was at his angriest, but now he was 10 times fiercer than before. So fierce, she did not dare to speak. Once Jin Zi let go of the woman's neck, the woman coughed violently. Jin Zi did not care and said coldly, "Apologize." The woman was full of unwillingness and answered impatiently, "I know. At least let me stand up." Jin Zi did not speak and watched the woman get up. However, just as the woman steadied herself, he kicked the woman's knee, and she knelt down. He lowered his eyes, and his fringe covered the left corner of his eye. He said, "If you want to apologize, you have to look like you're apologizing." The woman had always been proud, and when had she ever suffered such a loss? She stubbornly stood up, raised her chin, and said disdainfully, "Touching a woman, what kind of man are you?" "Thank you for the reminder. Don't worry, this lord will not touch a single hair on your body." Jin Zi sneered, and he snapped his fingers. A large tiger pounced over and pushed the woman down from behind, causing her to fall flat on her face beside Mu Ling-er's feet. The woman was furious. "You're going too far. This man actually humiliated her like this. Did he mean that she was only worthy of being touched by a beast?" How hateful. Jin Zi was really a block of ice when he was cold. He did not understand what going too far meant, but he knew that she had to pay the price for bullying Mu Ling-er. "Apologize," he said coldly. "Kill me if you have the ability." The woman was definitely afraid, so she hurriedly added a threat. "You'll never know who you are." The Black Forest was the home of all the beast tamer clans on Mysterious Continent. There were more than 10 beast tamer clans in the Black Forest, and there were different levels of beast taming skills. Being able to speak the beast language was just one of the skills, and almost all beast tamer clans knew it. The master of the Black Forest was the head of the beast tamer clans, the Ling family. This was because the Ling family's beast taming skills were far superior to other clans. Even the beasts controlled by other clans could be snatched away by the Ling family. Most importantly, the Ling family could tame the king of beasts, the Tiger clan. Many years ago, the Ling family's young master, who was not even a year old, suddenly disappeared. The Ling family's matriarch lost her mind because of this, and the Ling family's patriarch no longer cared about the clan's affairs in the Black Forest. He lived in seclusion with his wife, and they never saw anyone again. With the Ling family out of the way, the Black Forest lost all sense of order. The various clans fought fiercely against each other, and wild beasts ran amok. The Black Forest was already one of the most dangerous places in the Mysterious Continent, but after that, it became a place feared by many. Taming a single tiger was nothing, but taming a pack of them was something else. The woman was very likely that the man before her was a descendant of the Ling family. He had to be their long-lost young master. If he hadn't been killed in the past, then it was very likely that he'd been kidnapped and sold to Cloud Realm Continent. How could the two elders of the Ling family know that their son had been sent to Cloud Realm Continent? The woman knew that this was a secret, and it would be her greatest bargaining chip. "Are you threatening me?" Jinzi narrowed his eyes. "If you spare me, I'll take you back to your clan," the woman said seriously. Jinzi ignored her and made strange noises at the pack of wolves. Very soon, a wild wolf dashed over and stepped on the woman's back. Before the woman could understand what was going on, the wild wolf lowered its head and took a fierce bite, tearing off a large piece of meat from the woman's back. "Ah!" The woman cried out in pain, her shrill cries echoing through the snowy grounds. The wild wolf devoured the woman's flesh, leaving Mu linger gaping at the sight. Her heart raced, but Jinzi's gaze was cold and unmoved. Just as the wolf stepped on the woman's back again, she finally relented. Or rather, she gave in completely. Ignoring the pain, she cried out, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm sorry." Mu Linger gave a start and didn't say a word. "Whose medicine field is it?" Jinzi asked coldly. "It's hers. It's hers," the woman replied hastily. She didn't even wait for Jinzi to ask before she admitted it herself. "I'm a slut. I'm a slut." Mu Linger looked at the woman, then slowly glanced back at Jinzi, who was looking back at her. When their eyes met, Mu Linger subconsciously looked away. For some reason, she felt wronged and angry, but now she suddenly wanted to laugh. It wasn't because she wanted to vent her anger. She couldn't explain why. In any case, she was no longer angry at the woman and didn't want to be calculative. Jinzi asked coldly, "What happened to the wound on your face?" Only then did Mu Linger remember the scratch marks on her face. It still hurt when she touched them lightly. She said, "This woman scratched me. Take her back." Jinzi's tone was practically in order. He wouldn't allow Mu Linger to suffer any losses. Mu Linger looked up and said, "Forget it. Let's know." Jinzi interrupted her unhappily. Mu Linger said softly, "I'm fine. I won't be calculative with someone like her." Jinzi's face darkened as he said this. He hated this kind and magnanimous character the most. But unexpectedly, Mu Linger continued, "Ask her to apologize to Big White and ask Big White to catch her for me. I don't want to get physical with her." Hearing this, the woman was so angry that she forgot about the pain on her back. She was about to explode. She originally thought that Mu Linger would be more magnanimous. Who knew that Mu Linger would join Jinzi in humiliating her? They were clearly saying that she was only fit to be touched by beasts. Jinzi's frozen face finally cracked. He couldn't help but smile dotingly. Unfortunately, it disappeared quickly and Mu Linger didn't see it either. Coldly, he said, "All right." He looked at Big White. Seeing Big White covered in blood, how could he not feel pained? He waved his hand, and Big White ran over. He hadn't even opened his mouth when Big White attacked first. He swatted at the woman with his large paw and threw her into the distance. Beasts didn't care about her apology. In a world of beasts, how could there be such a thing as an apology? Attacking was the most straightforward way. Jin Zi and Mu Ling chased after her. Big White immediately followed after them. They saw the woman vomiting blood and fainting. Big White was about to attack again when Mu Ling hurriedly stopped him. That's enough. If you kill her, your master won't know where she came from. Chapter 1293. Not to mention a heavily injured person, even a normal person would die if they were to lie in the snow for 2 hours. Mu Ling personally took action and dragged the woman into the stone house. Jinzi pulled her up and frowned as he looked at the wound on her face. Go and apply medicine. Pull her back first, otherwise she will die. Mu Ling said seriously. She deserves to die. Jinzi said, You really don't want to know about your background? Mu Ling asked angrily. She did not know what she was angry about. She could not even speak 3 sentences with this fellow, and she would always get angry. I don't need you to care about my matters. Go and apply medicine. Jinzi pulled her into the house, but Mu Ling fiercely flung his hand away. I also don't need you to worry about my matters. You. Jinzi's anger was stuck in his chest, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. He scolded loudly. Mu Ling, how stupid are you? Did your parents give you a brain? Do you know how dangerous this place is? Who allowed you to come here? It was fine if he scolded her, but he even dragged her parents into it? Mu Ling was also angry. Jinzi, I will say it for the last time. I don't need you to worry about my matters. Don't you understand human language? You go now, immediately, quickly bring that woman into the house. If she dies, you won't even have time to cry. Whether she dies or not, what does it have to do with me? Jinzi was mad with anger. He risked his life and cleaved a path through the thick snow. He risked his life and braved the wind and snow. His clothes were wet and dry several times, but he didn't dare to stop to change. He just wanted to find her as soon as possible. How could she not be grateful to him? Didn't she love to cry? After suffering such a big grievance, if she did not accept it, shouldn't she throw herself into his arms and cry? She actually dared to quarrel with him so confidently? What kind of woman was this? Mu Ling was also angry. How hard was it to communicate with Jinzi? How many times do you want me to say it before you understand? Do you really not understand human language? If she's dead, you won't be able to find out who you really are? Haven't you been investigating your background? Mu Ling asked angrily. Why are you worried that I won't be able to find out my background? Goldie asked angrily. That's what I'm worried about. Mu Ling said fiercely. As soon as he said that, the two of them suddenly quieted down. They looked at each other at the same time, but they immediately looked away. Soon, Mu Ling explained anxiously. I was worried that you wouldn't be able to find out the truth and would blame me for it. I don't want to be the scapegoat. Thank you for reminding me. After Jinzi finished speaking, he strode over and carried the unconscious woman in his arms. Mu Ling looked at it and slowly frowned. She didn't even notice it. Jinzi placed the woman on the only stone couch in the stone house. Mu Ling entered the house and asked, What about Big White's injury? Its blood is poisonous. If you touch it, it will heal on its own, Jinzi said coldly. Mu Ling returned and stood by the bed. Jinzi couldn't take it anymore. Aren't you going to apply the medicine? If your face is ruined, you can forget about getting married for the rest of your life. Mu Ling didn't answer him, but she still went to apply the medicine obediently. Fortunately, the scratch marks weren't too deep and could still heal. After applying the medicine, Mu Ling sat down at the side and said mildly, Why are you here? Why? You don't want me to come? Jinzi asked. Mu Ling was silent for a moment before saying softly, Thank you. If he hadn't come, she didn't know what would have happened. She didn't know if she would have survived. She didn't know if Jinzi would accept her gratitude. He was silent for a long time. The two of them just sat there, the woman still unconscious. When the sky was completely dark, Mu Ling stood up and said mildly, I'm going to cook. Mu Ling, Jinzi called out to her. Who do you want to come? It was so dangerous, and she was bullied to tears. If she didn't want him to come, who did she want to come? Who do you want to come? Jean Z murmured. Mu Ling didn't turn around, but she stopped in her tracks. Who did she want to come? If Jean Z hadn't asked, she wouldn't have thought of this question. Yes, she was bullied to tears. Who did she want to come and save her? If it was in the past, the first person she thought of would be Chi brother. It must be. But this time, her mind was empty. She didn't think of anyone. She didn't have any hope or expectation. Would it mean that one had grown up when they no longer wished, longed, or imagined the impossible? She knew very well that Chi brother wouldn't come. It was impossible. No one. Mu Ling was very honest. I just want my martial arts to be better. Mu Ling was about to leave when Jean Z asked, Mu Ling, can I ask you a question? Mu Ling didn't say anything and didn't walk forward. Jean Z walked towards her step by step and stood behind her. Mu Ling waited for a moment, but he didn't continue. She was about to ask when Jean Z suddenly hugged her from behind and pulled her into his arms tightly. He said, Mu Ling, since you don't have any hope in your heart, then this time I'm here. Can you want me to come next time? Jean Z clearly felt the person in his arms stiffen. He buried his head in her shoulder and closed his eyes, waiting for an answer. Or rather, waiting for a trial. He knew that it was impossible, but he couldn't help but ask. He knew that he couldn't love her, but he couldn't help but say that he loved her. He knew that he could force her, but he couldn't bear to force her. He just wanted to ask. Mu Ling had already closed her eyes. She closed them the moment Jean Z hugged her. The corners of her eyes were filled with tears. She didn't know if it was from before or from now. She was afraid, but she didn't know what she was afraid of. She hadn't thought of Chi brother for a long time, but she suddenly thought of him at this time. She didn't know why she thought of him. In her world for more than 10 years, Chi brother was the only person she loved. No one else had ever loved her. In her world for more than 10 years, no one had ever loved her, including Chi brother. Was she afraid? Or was she not used to it? She couldn't figure out her own heart. She just realized that she didn't even understand herself. At this moment, she didn't even have the ability to think. She just wanted to run away and hide. Let go of me. Mu Ling choked. Jean Z instantly opened his eyes. You haven't answered my question. Mu Ling was about to answer, but Jean Z interrupted her. Think about it carefully before you give me an answer. I've waited for 2 years. I don't mind waiting for a few more years. He immediately let go of her after he finished speaking. Mu Ling rushed out and hid in a place where Jean Z couldn't see her. She cried loudly. She didn't even know why she was crying. She just wanted to cry. She was so upset that she wanted to cry. Why? Why was she so upset? When Mu Ling returned, Jean Z had already prepared a meal and was waiting for her. Her eyes were red from crying. She couldn't hide it no matter how hard she tried. But he acted as if nothing had happened. He sat at the table with his eyes downcast and his face cold. Mu Ling's attention was somewhat diverted when she saw the food on the table. The food was really delicious. It was a bowl of preserved meat rice. Although there were only mushrooms and preserved meat, the taste and appearance were mouth-watering. Eat it while it's hot. Jean Z said cold. Thank you. Mu Ling sat down. She ate a few mouthfuls and revealed an inconceivable expression. This meal was simply too delicious. There were only a few ingredients, and the seasoning was also very simple. How'd he do it? He was in such a bad mood, but he was still in the mood to make such a delicious meal. Mu Ling was actually very hungry. She ate one mouthful after another without stopping. But Jean Z didn't move his chopsticks and just stared at her cold. Mu Ling quickly felt his cold gaze. She held the bowl and turned around, leaving Jean Z with her back. Jean Z clenched his fists. Did this woman have a heart? She was crying so sadly just now, but she was still in the mood to eat. Jean Z's temper wasn't good, and his patience was even worse. Even he didn't know why he hadn't been angered to death by this woman yet. After the meal, the two of them didn't speak. It was already late at night. The wind and snow outside were heavy, and it was pitch black. The big tigers, wolves, and snow leopards were all guarding outside. Jean Z and Mu Ling didn't leave the stone house. The stone house was really simple. There were only 2 rooms, the bedroom inside and the kitchen outside. There was an empty door in the middle and a curtain between them. The only bed was occupied by the unconscious woman. Jean Z and Mu Ling'er could only sit. After sitting for a while, Jean Z went to the kitchen. He spread all the straw on the ground and called a big white tiger to lie on the side. Only then did he call Mu Ling'er over. Lean on the tiger and sleep. You won't freeze to death. Just make do for one night. He said cold. What about you? Mu Ling'er asked, who knew that Jean Z would throw her a sentence. None of your business. After saying that, he ran to the bedroom. Mu Ling'er stomped her foot and muttered, Can't you talk nicely? She was an impatient person. Other than looking for Chi brother and making medicine, she didn't do anything that required patience. She really didn't know how she could tolerate Jean Z again and again. If she didn't tolerate it, they would probably quarrel with each other every time they spoke. Mu Ling'er lay on the straw and leaned into the big white tiger's arms. It was strange. Perhaps it was because she trusted Jean Z enough, but she didn't know when she started to be afraid of tigers. Not only big white, but as long as it was a tiger that he tamed, she wouldn't be afraid. Mu Ling'er lay on the bed. She was obviously exhausted, but she couldn't fall asleep. She looked at the door curtain and couldn't help but be curious. What was Jean Z doing in the bedroom? A man and a woman alone. He really didn't shy away. Mu Ling'er was thinking about it when Jean Z suddenly came out. She immediately closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. Jean Z found the remaining straw and spread it out in front of Mu Ling'er. He called for a tiger and lay on the tiger's body like Mu Ling'er. Thus, the two of them became a man and a woman alone. They were very close to each other. As long as she stretched out her legs, they would touch his legs. Mu Ling'er was originally quite relaxed, but now she felt uncomfortable all over. After a long time, she secretly opened her eyes and saw Jean Z with his head lowered and his arms crossed. He seemed to be asleep. Mu Ling'er finally dared to open her eyes and look at him seriously. He was really, really good-looking. Other than Chi brother, she had never seen such a good-looking man. Chi brother was very good-looking like a demon, but he was very, very good-looking. Who exactly was he? Mu Ling'er stared at him blankly. As she was thinking, Jean Z suddenly reached out and covered his face. Mu Ling'er was shocked, and her face immediately turned red. This guy was actually not asleep. Chapter 1294. Jean Z covered his face with his hands. Mu Ling'er immediately lowered her head, not daring to look at him again. After a moment of silence, Jean Z said unhappily, If you can't sleep, think about how to answer my question. Mu Ling'er turned over and buried her head in the big tiger's warm embrace. At this moment, Jean Z put down his hands. He looked at Mu Ling'er, his cold eyes finally showing helplessness and doting. There were many times when he was so angry that he wanted to flip out, but he couldn't do anything about it. The two of them were silent like this. The whole world was quiet, leaving only the howling of the north wind outside. Not knowing if Mu Ling'er was asleep, Jean Z kept staring at Mu Ling'er. As he stared and stared, he fell asleep. It must be known that he hadn't rested for several days. He had been drenched by the rain and snow several times. In fact, he had already caught a cold, but he was still holding on. The next day, when Mu Ling'er woke up, Jean Z was already gone. She quickly ran to the bedroom and saw Jean Z standing by the bed, looking at the woman in a daze. She walked in. Jean Z looked back at her, but didn't say anything. Mu Ling'er walked over and took the woman's pulse. She also checked her injuries and said indifferently, It's not life-threatening. It's just an internal injury. She should wake up soon. Let the white tiger send you down the mountain. I went up the mountain to open the road. Last night's snow shouldn't have covered the road. You can leave, Jean Z said indifferently. He was chasing her away again. Mu Ling'er was angry and immediately refused. I'm not leaving. If you're not leaving, then what are you staying for? You're in the way, Jean Z said unhappily. I'm guarding my medicine field and waiting for you, Hutie, to come. What does that have to do with you? What does it have to do with you? Mu Ling'er asked back. Jean Z suddenly turned around, as if he wanted to say something, but he held back. Coldly, he looked at Mu Ling'er. Mulinger let him look at her, not afraid. Mulinger assumed that Jean Z was going to say a bunch of curses and scold her again, but she didn't. However, Jean Z didn't. In the end, he only said one sentence. "This is none of your business. You can leave first." Mulinger furrowed her brows and puffed up her cheeks. She glared at Jean Z and turned to leave without hesitation. Jean Z even added, "Don't come in if there's nothing important." Mulinger was already at the door, but she suddenly turned around and said coldly, "I was the one who cleaned up this house. You should be the one leaving. Get out right now and take that woman away too." Jean Z was speechless. He actually carried the woman and walked out of the door in large strides. Mulinger's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. She followed behind Jean Z, and as soon as Jean Z reached the door, she slammed the door and scolded angrily. "Hugging just anyone. Shameless." She leaned against the door, slid down slowly, and sat down. In her heart, there was only pain. She had never felt so stifled in her life. Even if she was thrown aside by Chi brother, she would be able to get over it quickly and be filled with energy to continue looking for him. However, facing Jean Z, she couldn't do it. She hated this kind of stifled feeling. It was as if she had fallen into a quagmire and was sinking deeper and deeper. It wasn't that she didn't want to get up, nor did she have the energy to get up, but she didn't know how to get up. She only wanted to escape and didn't want to see him. She leaned against the door and sat with her head on her knees, lying on her stomach. Outside the door, Jean Z stood for a while. He couldn't hear any movement inside the door, and his irritation was written all over his cold face. He casually threw the woman out, and she fell onto the snow. He looked around and didn't know where to go, so he simply leaned against the door and sat down. His face was so gloomy that anyone who saw it would be afraid. After sitting for a while, the woman actually moved. She slowly turned over and sat up. Jean Z looked on coldly without a word. After the woman stood up, she suddenly realized that Jean Z was sitting beside her. Her first reaction was to run, but all the beasts that were crouching around her immediately stood up, including the snow leopards and wild wolves that she had previously subdued. What could be more ironic than being betrayed by your own wild beasts? Jean Z's lips curved into a cold smile as he stood up as well. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Jean Z's voice was as cold as ever, but he deliberately raised his voice. Muling heard Jean Z's voice from inside the room and quickly rose to her feet to peek out the window. The woman looked around and calmed down considerably. She was originally running away from her marriage to Cloud Realm Continent. Yesterday, she'd just arrived at the snowy mountains from Winter Crow Country and saw a field of medicinal plants. She never thought she'd run into the Ling clan's long-lost young head. If she couldn't escape, she might as well take a gamble. If she could capture that man and bring him back to the Black Forest, no one would force her to marry him. She'd even become the mistress of the woods. Thinking up to here, the woman couldn't help but feel excited. She said, "I come from a mysterious continent. My name is Feng Ying, the eldest young miss of the Feng clan. You're Ling Gu, the sole heir of the Ling clan's 9th generation. You're the only one in the entire mysterious continent who has the talent to tame tigers and command them. I, on the other hand, can control all kinds of beasts except for the tiger clan. We were betrothed before we were even born, but you were kidnapped before you were even 3 years old." Muling was stunned by her words. Jean Z, on the other hand, remained expressionless and silent. "I've been looking for you all over the world since I was 13. I never thought I'd find you here. I never thought you'd treat me like this for the sake of a woman." Feng Ying's tears threatened to fall as she spoke. "Both families searched for you for over a decade before they gave up. I was the only one who persisted. I wanted to find you and bring you home." Muling grew even more alarmed, but Jean Z didn't react. Cold, he asked, "Why should I believe you?" "Because I know there's a scar on your right wrist," Feng Ying said seriously. Jean Z finally revealed a shocked expression. He didn't expect this woman to know such a secret. However, Feng Ying continued, "This scar will grow with you and slowly spread to your palm." "Who the hell are you?" Jean Z finally lost his composure. Jin Zi's reaction let Mu Ling know that Feng Ying was telling the truth. I've already said it very clearly. I'm your fiancé. Feng Ying suddenly pointed at Mu Ling, who was hiding behind the window. Who the hell is she? What's your relationship with her? Mu Ling was stunned and subconsciously dodged. She leaned against the wall beside the window, not knowing what to do. Soon, she heard Jin Zi's answer. He said, "She's my friend." Jin Zi was skeptical of Feng Ying's words. He could tell that it wasn't that easy to get the truth out of Feng Ying. Instead of doubting Feng Ying, he might as well beat her at her own game. Friend? Feng Ying sneered. You hurt me like this for a friend? I didn't know who you were yesterday. Jin Zi retorted cold. Since you knew who I was, why didn't you say so earlier? Did you give me a chance to speak? Feng Ying pretended to be angry and questioned. Yesterday, when he avenged that brat, he didn't give her a chance to explain. Instead, he forced her to apologize before asking about her background. She didn't believe that the brat was only his friend. If it wasn't for the person in her heart, could it be more important than her background? She thought that this couple must have had some conflict and quarreled. No matter what their relationship was, even if they were married, she must get rid of that brat. Marrying him meant owning the entire Black Forest. No matter what methods or lies she used, she must seize this opportunity. Jin Zi didn't argue with Feng Ying. Cold, he asked, "Where's the Ling family on the mysterious continent?" This guy had the ability to tame a tiger, but he didn't know his background. He probably didn't know anything about the mysterious continent. A trace of treachery flashed across Feng Ying's eyes. Will you go back with me? You haven't answered my question yet, Jin Zi said cold. Will you marry me? Feng Ying asked again. Jin Zi cold looked at her and didn't answer. Mu Ling leaned against the wall and felt that the whole world was quiet. She waited silently, not waiting for Jin Zi's answer. Feng Ying hesitated for a moment and pretended to cry. Ling, you like that brat, right? Jin Zi still didn't answer. Okay, if you like that brat, pretend that you didn't meet me. I'll go back by myself. I'll pretend that you're dead and never look for you again. After saying that, she really turned to leave. Jin Zi cold looked at her and was about to speak when Mu Ling suddenly opened the door and said loudly, Stop. He doesn't like me, and I don't like him. We're just friends. He will go with you. Jin Zi suddenly frowned and asked cold, What right do you have to make the decision for me? For the first time, Mu Ling looked into Jin Zi's angry eyes so bravely. She wasn't stupid enough to completely believe Feng Ying's words, but this was an opportunity. An opportunity to go to the mysterious continent, to find her hometown and family. She believed that with Jin Zi's intelligence, he wouldn't be fooled by Feng Ying and could use Feng Ying to find out about her background. Jin Zi was a man who did things his own way and did as he pleased. He could not be restrained in Northern Li or in the officialdom. He could not stay for her sake. He should return to the place where he truly belonged. Her heart was too small, too weak. She had loved once. She didn't dare and wouldn't love again. Mu Ling said seriously, Jin Zi, leave. Northern Li isn't suitable for you. Such a simple sentence was enough to shatter Goldie's heart. If he wanted to leave, he would have left long ago. He wouldn't have worked so hard in Northern Li for 2 years. Northern Li wasn't suitable for him. So she knew. Jin Zi sneered. Mu Ling, before I leave, shouldn't you settle the score? Score? In Tiger's prison, you owed me a night. In the cave, you owed me a lifetime. A year has passed. Mu Ling, I'm sorry to tell you that I'll add all the interest. Don't even think about leaving my side for the rest of your life. Jin Zi suddenly forced himself in front of Mu Ling, and said word by word, You come with me. He was finally ruthless. After going around in circles and hiding for 2 years, they were still back to square one. It was like a knot that couldn't be untied. No matter how the string was twisted, it would never be untied. Mu Ling only felt weak all over and her mind was in a mess. Actually, she had always remembered what happened in Tiger's prison and the cave. She had also been prepared to repay the debt. But at this moment, she was still caught unprepared. Chapter 1295. Mu Ling was stunned for a long time before she murmured, Gene Z, if this is a debt, I'll pay it back. If I'm not the person you want me to be, then you can treat me as a debt collector. Gene Z took Mu Ling, Er's hand, and held it tightly. I told you long ago that I need a clean woman. Mu Ling lowered her head and did not speak. Feng Ying did not know what they were talking about. Seeing Gene Z holding Mu Ling, Er's hand, she was shocked. Ling Ge, are you really not going back with me for this woman? Do you know that your parents have been going crazy looking for you all these years? Gene Z did not explain further. He only said coldly, lead the way. You want to take her back? Feng Ying asked angrily. Gene Z replied, don't worry. If you and I really have a marriage contract, I'll definitely marry you if you take me back. Then what about her? What do you mean? Feng Ying asked again. This brat was too much of a hindrance. Are you going or not? Gene Z paused between each word. It was obvious that he was about to lose his last bit of patience. Feng Ying met his gloomy eyes and was inexplicably afraid. She did not dare to delay. Let's go. Go from the back of the mountain. There's a path there. She could only take one step at a time. This time, the road to Xiankong was still very long. She would definitely get Ling Ge before she reached Xiankong and kill Mu Ling on the way. When Feng Ying said there was a path at the back of the mountain, Gene Z understood how she went up the mountain. These 3 snowy mountains were located at the border between Winter Crow Country and Northern Li. The sun side of the mountain belonged to Northern Li, while the Yin side belonged to Winter Crow Country. Even so, the 2 countries did not make any big moves on these snowy mountains. It was not for any other reason, but because these snowy mountains could not be conquered. There was a path at the back of the mountain. It was very likely that this woman opened it. She went up the snowy mountains from Winter Crow Country. Beyond Winter Crow Country and Northern Li's northern border was the endless ice sea. After Long Fei Yi established the Great Qin State, he set up a few heavily guarded checkpoints at the northern border of Northern Li. It would not be easy for the people of Xiankong to pass through them. This woman must have entered Cloud Realm Continent from the borders of Winter Crow Country and the Ice Sea. The border between Winter Crow Country and the Ice Sea was not closed. Anyone could enter and leave at will. Feng Ying walked in front while Gene Z held onto Mu Ling, Er's hand, and followed behind them. The snow leopards and wild wolves all dispersed while the 10 white tigers and Bai followed behind them. He didn't know where Bai had gone last night, but when he reappeared today, his fur was clean again. It was as white as snow and looked especially holy and noble. Bai didn't know what had happened between his master and Ling, but he was very happy to see his master holding Ling Er's hand. They took a detour from the mountainside on the sunny side of the mountain to the mountainside on the shady side of the mountain. Gradually, they saw the vast grassland of Winter Crow covered in snow. Gene Z unconsciously stopped walking as he stared at the sea of snow in a daze. He and Su Donglin hadn't actually entered Winter Crow Country when they used the secret passage for official business. This was the first time he'd returned after leaving Winter Crow Country. He'd yearned for freedom countless times in the past, but all of it had to do with this land and the vast grasslands, blue skies, and white clouds. Who would have thought that he'd come back to see a gloomy sky and a vast expanse of white snow? Who would have thought that he'd come back with a woman who could make him lose all reason? Who would have thought that he'd come back to a land that was no longer his home? Feng Ying saw that Gene Z had stopped walking and said, I've opened a path. There's a way to get down the mountain. We'll take Winter Crow Country and cross the Ice Sea to reach Xiankong. Gene Z recovered his wits and asked, the shady side of the mountain is steeper than the sunny side, and the snow has sealed off the path. How did you open a path? It was precisely because the shady side of the 3 snowy mountains was so steep that even though this was the border, there weren't any checkpoints on the mountain. Instead, there were a few small checkpoints at the foot of the mountain. If there really was a path that led up the mountain from Winter Crow Country, then this path will become the second secret passage. After all, after ascending the snowy mountains, it wouldn't be so difficult to sneak into Great Qin. Perhaps because he was used to being an official in Northern Li, Gene Z silently remembered this matter and planned to tell Long Fei Yi when he returned. He was clearly going to search for his origins and his home, but he was still thinking about coming back. Even he didn't realize his own contradiction. Mu Ling, who'd been keeping her head down, also looked up at the vast snowy plains. She didn't make a sound and continued to keep her head down. We open it on the path opened by our ancestors. Let's go. Feng Ying didn't explain much. When Jinzi saw the path on the couch, he knew what was going on. This path didn't come up from the foot of the mountain. Instead, it went down from the mountain, and a large part of the path had to slide down with the help of snow and ice. It was obvious that this path was a secret passage opened by Jun Yixie, a secret passage from Northernly to Winter Crow Country. Perhaps Jun Yixie wanted to avoid Winter Crow Country's borders, or perhaps Jun Yixie wanted to hide from the spies of the Northern Dynasty's emperors. Jinzi didn't make any more guesses. Jun Yixie was dead, and Northernly was destroyed. These things were meaningless. Jinzi didn't ask Feng Ying anything else, and Feng Ying was also silent. She would occasionally look back at Mu Ling, and she was thinking of some evil ideas along the way. The three of them walked from morning to night, circling around half of the snowy mountains, and finally reached a steep slope. Feng Ying pulled over the sled that was placed at the side and said, "It took me a day to climb up. If we go down, we'll be there soon. Let's hurry up before it gets dark. There are herdsmen at the foot of the mountain who can stay overnight." Jinzi glanced at the sled and asked coldly, "Do you know how to do it?" "Of course I do. It's very easy. Don't you know how to do it? I'll teach you," Feng Ying quickly replied. However, Jinzi ignored her and said coldly, "Answer me." He was asking Mu Ling, Mu Ling, who didn't know what she was thinking. Jinzi tightened his grip, and she came back to her senses, looking confused. "This thing, do you know how to do it?" Jinzi's tone was very unpleasant, but he still had patience. Mu Ling didn't say anything and only shook her head. Feng Ying sneered in her heart. Even if this girl didn't know how to do it, so what? The sled here were all for one person and couldn't bear the weight of two people at all. On this steep slope, she must kill Mu Ling, who knew that Jinzi borrowed a sword from her and chopped down a big tree, cutting down a section of wood that was of moderate length so that two people could sit on it. He didn't even say a word to Feng Ying as he pulled Mu Ling to sit on the long piece of wood, and the two of them slid down together. Feng Ying was so angry that she stomped her feet and hurriedly stepped onto the sled to chase after them. At the start, the slope wasn't too steep, and Mu Ling didn't have much of a reaction. But as the slope became steeper and steeper, the speed of the wood sliding became faster and faster. Mu Ling's heartbeat also started to speed up. She sat in front while Jinzi sat behind her and hugged her tightly. But the angle of the dive still gave her a fright. She couldn't help but cry out in shock as she closed her eyes. The more she screamed, the tighter Jinzi hugged her, wishing that he could embed this woman into his arms and never let her go. Amidst Mu Ling's screams, Jinzi asked in a low voice, "Linger, I'm sorry. I finally forced you. I admit that I can't do without you." Mu Ling didn't reply because Jinzi's words were drowned out by her screams and the whistling of the wind. If this steep slope was infinitely long, how great would that be? But unfortunately, even the longest road would have an end, much less a steep slope. Very quickly, they slid down the mountain and slid into a forest covered with ice and snow. Feng Ying followed closely behind, and when she saw Jinzi hugging Mu Ling tightly and not letting go, she couldn't help but feel jealous. Originally, she only wanted that man for the power of the Black Forest, but now she realized that she wanted him from the bottom of her heart and also couldn't tolerate Mu Ling this wretched lass from the bottom of her heart. Mu Ling closed her eyes and curled up into a ball in Jinzi's arms. She had yet to recover from her shock, and Jinzi hugged her tightly, not regaining his senses from warmth. They sat there quietly, claiming to be in a quiet world. However, Feng Ying quickly broke this beautiful silence. "Let's go quickly, or we'll freeze to death if we don't have a place to stay tonight," she urged and added, "You'd better not bring those tigers along, or no herdsman will take you in." Jinzi still ignored her, but Mu Ling slowly opened her eyes and realized that she had landed safely on flat ground. She heaved a sigh of relief and quickly realized that she was in Jean Z's tight embrace. She seemed to want to say something, but swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Was it useful for her to say anything more? The more she spoke, the more noisy she would be. She also ignored Feng Ying, who was standing at the side, and continued to lower her head, remaining silent like a mute. Did you hear that? Let's go quickly. Feng Ying was burning with anger and was about to push Mu Ling away when she was stunned by Jean Z's deep gaze. Jean Z let go of Mu Ling, but didn't forget to pull her up. Feng Ying threw him an aggrieved and dissatisfied look, but Jean Z pretended not to see it. He dismissed all the tigers and said coldly, "Lead the way." The three of them spent 2 hours and finally saw signs of human habitation when it was late at night. The herdsmen were warm and hospitable, but unfortunately, they didn't have any extra space and could only let Jean Z stay in a small tent to store firewood. The old woman took out the best sheepskin in the house and laid it on the haystack. Then, she took out a quilt and carefully laid it out. She chuckled and said, "Young master, it's very warm like this. Don't worry. These 2 girls will sleep in my daughter's room. Tomorrow morning, Annie will make pancakes for you to eat." Feng Ying was overjoyed and knew that her chance had come. However, Jean Z hugged Mu Ling, and said, "She'll sleep here with me." The old woman glanced at Mu Ling suspiciously. Seeing that Jean Z's expression wasn't good, she didn't dare to ask more and just nodded and left. Once the old woman left, Feng Ying was furious. You guys, Linga, how can you be like this? I'm your fiancé after all. We'll leave at sunrise tomorrow. You can go out now." Jean Z interrupted cold. What do you take me for? If you're like this, I won't take you back. I'll leave by myself." Feng Ying ran out in a huff. She thought that Jean Z would chase after her, but who knew that Jean Z would only give her the sound of the door slamming shut. No matter how many lies, schemes, they were all useless in front of someone who couldn't be bothered to pay attention to you. At least, in front of Jean Z's indifference, they wouldn't be able to do anything. The sound of the door slamming shut shattered Feng Ying's evil plan and also woke Mu Ling up. She slowly turned back to look at the tightly shut wooden door. Her originally stiff body became even stiffer, and she couldn't help but tremble. What was Jean Z trying to do? Chapter 1296. Mu Ling was really frightened, but Jean Z didn't actually want to do anything. He was already tired to the limit. His mind was heavy and he was starting to feel cold. He let go of Mu Ling, and without saying a word, he took off his coat and went to sleep under the blanket. Mu Ling, was in disbelief. She stood there in a daze until her legs were sore. She saw that Jean Z seemed to have fallen asleep and didn't move at all. Her wildly beating heart gradually calmed down. She had scared herself too much this time. She looked around and found that all the straw in the tent had been spread on the ground and covered with lamb fur. There were only piles of thorny firewood left. She couldn't even find a suitable place to sit. She could either squat at the side or sit beside Jean Z. She hesitated for a while and actually chose to squat at the side. As the night deepened, the temperature became colder. Mu Ling's feet and hands gradually became cold. She had no choice but to stand up. She rubbed her hands and jumped on the spot to warm herself up. After a while, Jean Z suddenly lifted the blanket. Mu Ling jumped in fright and subconsciously retreated. Jean Z coldly sized her up. She immediately lowered her head and didn't move. "Come here," Jean Z said coldly. He already didn't want to scold her for being stupid. Standing like this in the middle of the night, didn't she know that she would get sick from the cold? Wasn't she usually fierce? Why was she so clingy now? Didn't she know that she should come over and snatch the blanket? If she came over to snatch it, would he not let her? She was simply too stupid to be saved. Mu Ling didn't move at all. It was as if she didn't hear Jean Z's words. Jean Z saw that her lips were purple from the cold and became even angrier. He directly shouted at her. "Did you hear me when I asked you to come over? Do you want me to say it a third time?" Mu Ling still didn't move. Jin Z raised his head and closed his eyes. He was silent for a while before saying, "Come over. You owe me that night. It's time to pay it back." Mu Ling tightly pursed her lips. She was about to cry, but she still didn't move. "Come here yourself. Don't make me do it." Goldie was determined. Mu Linger abruptly raised her head to look at him. Her large, watery eyes were filled with tears, as if they would burst at any moment. She still didn't move. Finally, Jin Z got up and rushed in front of her, pulling off her belt. Mu Linger closed her eyes and raised her head, stubbornly refusing to let her tears fall. After Jin Z took off her light yellow cotton-padded jacket, he carried her in his arms. He clearly felt her trembling, but he didn't say a word. He carried her to lie down on the lamb's fur and pulled the blanket over her head. Hiding in the quilt, Mu Linger suddenly felt warm, but her heart also fell into the ice cellar. She curled up into a ball and trembled slightly, not daring to imagine what would happen next. Jin Z lay down behind her, but he didn't touch her again. He just lay next to her, his eyes wide open as he stared blankly at the top of the tent. Mu Linger waited for a long time and was afraid for a long time, but Jin Z didn't move. She carefully opened her eyes. Her gaze was complicated. There was uneasiness, relief, doubt, confusion, pain, and tears. She couldn't help but recall that night in Tiger's Denver. That night in Tiger's Den, he discovered the truth that she wasn't pregnant. He sat on her body like a hooligan and checked her stomach. She struggled with all her might and only calmed down after he warned her. Later on, the two of them clearly got up, but he suddenly pressed her down and kissed her to silence her cries, avoiding Uncle Chung. Just like that, he found out the truth about Sister Jing's pregnancy. Helpless, she begged him to keep it a secret, but he shamelessly made a condition. He said, "How about sleeping with me for a night?" She slapped him on the spot, but in the end, she had no choice but to agree. She remembered clearly that night when he brought her back to the room, threw her onto the bed harshly, and immediately took advantage of her. She was so frightened that she cried and begged him not to, but he punched the side of her head and yelled at her. She clearly didn't try to remember it, but she still remembered what he yelled at her on the bed that night. "If you're scared, why did you agree to it? Why did you agree to it? Why don't you fucking cherish yourself? How am I supposed to cherish you?" Just like that, he helped her keep the secret of her fake pregnancy, and she owed him a night. She knew very well what kind of night it was. Jin Z didn't move. Mu Linger's heart was equally uneasy. She couldn't see through him after all. She was so tired that she wanted to die, but she didn't dare to sleep. Her body didn't even dare to relax. Suddenly, Jin Z opened his mouth and said, "Mu Linger, are you asleep?" Mu Linger was frightened and didn't dare to answer. Jin Z slowly turned over, hugged her from behind, and leaned his whole body against hers. She didn't know if it was because the lamb's fur and bedding were too warm, but when Jin Z came close, Mu Linger felt the entire bed warming up. She could clearly feel his hands slowly wrap around her waist and slowly tighten his hold. She could feel his body pressing against her back and his long legs wrapped around hers. She could feel herself slowly being imprisoned in his arms, and it was getting warmer and warmer. But everything stopped there. His hands were very quiet. They only hugged her waist and didn't move. He hugged her tightly, just like that, and returned to silence. Was that it? Was that all he wanted for a night? Mu Linger opened her eyes wide, and she was no longer sleepy. After a long time, she suddenly heard him whisper in her ear, "Little fool, be good and sleep. Don't be afraid. I can't bear to do it." His voice was very, very gentle. It was completely different from the coldness from before. It sounded like a lover's whisper, but also like the ravings of a delirious person. Mu Linger heard it, and the tears that she had been hiding in her eyes suddenly fell. "Jin Z." She choked the moment she opened her mouth. "Why are you so nice? Why are you so stubborn? What do you want me to do with you?" "Jin Z, I've given all my love to Chi brother. I've given it all away. How should I love you?" Mu Linger felt so bad that she started to cry softly. However, Jin Z didn't hear her words and didn't realize that she was crying. Jin Z was already delirious from his high fever. His whole body was hot, and his face was red. Mu Ling'er pulled down the blanket and turned around, wanting to ask him properly. But when she turned around, Mu Ling'er then realized that Jin Zi was acting strangely. So it wasn't because the blanket was too warm, but because he had a fever. His whole body was burning hot. Mu Ling'er touched his forehead and was frightened by the temperature. She almost gave herself a slap. She was a pharmacist. The person beside her was burning up, and she didn't even notice it. She hurriedly took Jin Zi's pulse. Once she took his pulse, she started to cry. Jin Zi had caught a very, very severe cold. It must have accumulated over the past few days to become like this. God knows how much he had suffered in order to find her. When she met a patient, she would always be anxious but not flustered. But this time, she was flustered. She started to mumble to herself, "Medicine, my medicine. Where's my medicine?" Luckily, she had the habit of carrying a medicine bag with her. She didn't care about the cold and hurriedly got up. She grabbed the medicine bag on the ground and took out a bunch of dried herbs and rushed out of the door. Bang, bang, bang. She frantically knocked on the old lady's door. The old lady's family hurriedly opened the door. When they saw her crying face, they were scared to tears. "Miss, what's wrong?" Mu Ling'er didn't realize that she had been crying. She said, "Jin Zi is sick. I want to help him boil his medicine. I want to help him boil his medicine. Quick!" The old lady then understood and hurriedly brought Mu Ling'er to the kitchen to help start the fire. Feng Ying had long been woken up by Mu Ling'er's knocking on the door. Just as the old lady and Mu Ling'er were busy in the kitchen, she secretly slipped out and sneaked into Jin Zi's tent. She glanced at the cotton-padded jacket on the ground and then looked at Jin Zi. She muttered softly, "Sick?" She carefully walked closer and saw Jin Zi hugging the bedding and muttering something in his sleep. She didn't know what he was saying. She leaned closer and listened carefully. She only heard a name, Ling. He was already so sick, but he was still thinking about that stinky lass. Feng Ying's jealousy was about to burn. She was the most beautiful person in the Black Forest. Why did she have to marry someone she didn't like? Why couldn't she marry the most honorable man in the Black Forest? A trace of ruthlessness flashed past her eyes. She took off her clothes without hesitation and hugged Jin Zi. "I'm Ling'er. I'm here." She wrapped her arms around Jin Zi and pulled his hand to touch her body. "Ling'er, Mu Ling." Jin Zi's eyes were tightly shut and he was in a daze. He didn't know that Mu Ling'er had already left. He always thought that Mu Ling'er was still by his side, still in his arms. He hugged the person in his arms tightly again. His hand was still wrapped around her waist. He only wanted to hug her and trap her. That was all. However, the person in his arms was restless. She pulled his hand and moved it inch by inch down her abdomen. Her hand kept teasing him. He still pulled away. "Ling'er, you can't. I don't want to force you. I don't want to force you. Ling'er, be good. Just let me hug you. Ling'er, why didn't I meet you earlier? Why?" When Feng Ying heard these words, she more or less knew what was going on. Her jealousy towards Mu Ling'er deepened by 3 points. She broke free from Jin Zi's hand and took off his clothes even more boldly, teasing him unabashedly. Just as Jin Zi was about to pull her hand away, she suddenly leaned over to his ear and said softly, "I'm willing. I like you." When these words came out, Jin Zi obviously froze. However, he quickly flipped over and pressed Feng Ying under him. His brows were tightly knitted and he had a splitting headache. However, he still slowly opened his eyes. He wanted to look at her. He wanted to look at her and hear her say those words. He forced himself to hold on and slowly open his eyes. However, the figure in front of him was swaying as if there were countless shadows. He couldn't see her clearly. He lowered his head and buried his head in her body. Just at this moment, the wooden door suddenly opened and he didn't even realize it. It was until a bang sound came from the door that he was jolted awake. He subconsciously turned back to take a look and saw Mu Ling'er standing at the door with tears streaming down her face. Her hands were hanging in the air. Beneath her feet, a bowl of medicine was scattered all over the ground. "Ling'er," he muttered and was stunned for a moment before he lowered his head to look at the person beneath him. In an instant, he was completely awake. Both of them were naked. What would he do just now? Feng Ying looked towards Mu Linger, and a cold smile flashed past her eyes. Although this stinky lass had come too quickly and caused her to not be able to cook the rice. But letting this stinky lass witness this scene with her own eyes might not be a bad thing. Feng Ying waited, waiting for Mu Linger to turn around and run away. However, Chapter 1297. When Mu Linger saw this scene, she did not turn around and run away. She regained her senses and suddenly rushed in front of Jin Zi and Feng Ying. She did not know where she got the strength from, but she pushed Jin Zi away and gave Feng Ying a fierce slap. Feng Ying did not expect this and had not recovered from the slap. Jin Zi was weak all over and could not get up after being pushed to the side. He looked at Mu Ling, whose face was covered in tears. He wanted to explain, but did not know how to. He had no idea what had happened. His memory stopped at hugging Mu Ling, and falling asleep. He really could not remember what happened after that. Mu Ling, glared at Jin Zi angrily before turning around and running out. Mu Ling, Jin Zi panicked. At this time, Feng Ying regained her senses and muttered, "She hit me? She dared to hit me." Jin Zi coldly looked at Feng Ying. Although his body was weak, his eyes revealed a terrifying killing intent. The anger emitted from his body grew stronger and stronger. Seeing this, Feng Ying could not help but retreat in fear. I heard that you were sick, so I came over to take a look." Feng Ying hurriedly quibbled. "Who knew that you would? Linga, you bullied me. Why are you still so fierce?" Jin Zi defended her and did not even need to ask the truth. He said coldly, "I'm going to kill you." Linga, Feng Ying subconsciously retreated. Even though she knew that Jin Zi did not have the strength to trust a chicken, even though she knew that she could control this man at any time, she was still afraid. She was so afraid that she forgot to make a move and only knew to retreat and hide. His eyes were too terrifying. Very quickly, Feng Ying sensed a group of beasts approaching. She had been with beasts since she was young and understood that kind of aura too well. The outside of the tent must have been surrounded by beasts. They were all filled with killing intent, because the man in front of her really wanted to kill her. Feng Ying's back hit the pile of firewood, and she had no way to retreat. She finally revealed her true colors. "Let me go, and I'll tell you everything." Jin Zi was indifferent. Although he did not move, the cold, killing intent in his eyes pressed towards Feng Ying, as if he could kill her at any time. The more silent Jin Zi was, the more terrified Feng Ying was. "I'll tell you everything about the Ling family, the whole truth, and you'll let me go." Jin Zi was definitely not interested in what she had to say. Coldly, he stared at her and growled like a beast. This was the sound of calling for a beast. Feng Ying's entire body trembled. She suddenly rolled to the side and grabbed a dagger. Since he couldn't have her and wanted her to die, then he might as well die. She pulled out her dagger and stabbed at Jin Zi. However, before she could stab the gold, she was pushed to the ground by the big white tiger that rushed in. "No," Feng Ying shouted, but her voice was quickly stopped by the big white tiger's fangs. Grab her by the neck and drag her out of the room without any hesitation. He took note of the bloodstains on the ground. Outside the tent were all ferocious beasts. All the ferocious beasts on the grassland had come. Tigers, snow leopards, wolves, and even a few big lions surrounded the few tents. The big white tiger dragged Feng Ying out and threw her far away onto the snowy ground. Feng Ying was bitten on the neck and was bleeding profusely, but she was still on the verge of death. However, very quickly, the surrounding wild beasts all pounced over to fight for food and drowned her. This kind of fear before death was probably unimaginable. To Feng Ying, it was really a fate worse than death. The livestock in the nearby sheep pen and horse pen were all frightened. They kept neighing and bumping around. The herdsman's family had already hidden, not daring to look outside. Mu Linger's whereabouts were unknown because there was no sign of her. In just a short while, the ferocious beasts all dispersed, leaving behind a pool of blood and a pile of bones on the snowy ground. Feng Ying, who had controlled all kinds of ferocious beasts since young, definitely did not expect that she would die in such a way. Peace returned to the grassland. In the tent, Jean Z lay on the ground. He had a splitting headache and was shivering nonstop. He wanted to get up and find Mu Ling, but he could not use any strength. Not to mention getting up, he could not even turn over. He tried a few times, but he could not stand up in the end. He could only give up. He looked at the top of the tent and slowly lifted his bangs. His extremely beautiful eyes were gradually covered with a layer of despair. In this life, even if he was locked in a cage as a slave, even if he was bought to the three-way black market and sold in the market with a clear price, he had never been so desperate. Pain slowly appeared in this despair. He slowly closed his eyes and no longer saw any emotions in them. His body was weak and his heart was weak. He did not know if he had given up on the world or if the world had given up on him. At this moment, hurried footsteps came from outside the door and approached him. He heard it, but he was indifferent. He only thought that the herdsman had come to save him. However, it was Mu Ling who came. She carried the freshly brewed medicinal decoction and rushed over with a hurried expression. The moment she entered, she saw Jean Z lying naked on the ground. Half of his body was naked, and the other half was covered in the blanket. He raised his hands high to cover his forehead. Although Mu Ling was very anxious, she still stopped in her tracks when she saw this scene. Her gaze unconsciously moved down Jean Z's hands, arms, and shoulders. It was hard to imagine that such a skinny person could have such a refined body. Just the lines of his arms were perfect, as if they were carved. His shoulders were not as weak as they usually looked. They were not broad, but they were broad and refined. They were sexy and full of strength. Could it be related to his clothes? The more Mu Ling looked, the more amazed she was. The more she looked, the more she could not help but look down. She could see his perfect chest and abdominal muscles. They were so well-defined that they looked like a sculpture. She couldn't stop her gaze from moving down his abdominal muscles. The lines became more refined as she moved down, and they were even more breathtaking. She blushed and blushed. It was not until her line of sight was blocked by the blanket that Mu Ling suddenly regained her senses. The medicine in her hand almost fell to the ground again. Are all men's bodies so beautiful? This question surfaced in Mu Ling's mind. She hurriedly shook her head and ignored this thought. She put the medicine aside and hurriedly pulled the blanket over Jean Z tightly. Jean Z's eyes were tightly shut. He was immersed in despair and was indifferent to the movements around him. It was only when Mu Ling touched his hand that he was shocked and recognized her hand immediately. He opened his eyes abruptly. Sure enough, he saw the face that he had missed for more than 2 years. Her face was full of tears, and she looked like a pitiful person. He was obviously in despair, but at this moment he smiled. He gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said gently, "Mu Ling, I dreamed of you again." He thought that he would never see her again, not even dream of her. Mu Ling was stunned. She hurriedly avoided his gentle gaze and his hand. She touched his forehead. Although she had expected it, she was still shocked by the temperature. He was already sick, and after the torment just now, his condition had worsened. She hurriedly took his pulse. Sure enough, his condition had worsened. The medicine would definitely worsen his condition, but his condition was too urgent. If she hesitated any longer or came any later, his brain would have been burned out. She did not have time to brew the medicine again. She had to let Jean Z drink this bowl of medicine first to slow down his condition. Get up and drink the medicine. Hurry. This is not a dream. Mu Ling said seriously. She used all her strength to pull Jean Z up to sit. Unfortunately, she could not move him at all. This guy looked so thin, but she could not tell how heavy he was. She had already personally tested it. If Jean Z had the strength to move, he would have gone out to look for her. He did not even have the strength to turn over. Be good. Sit down quietly, and let me take a good look. Jean Z still thought that he was immersed in a dream. In the past 2 years, he had dreamed of her too often. He would dream of her every few days. He would always wonder if it was because he dreamed of her so often that he could not let go or forget her. Mu Ling was anxious. It's not a dream, it's real. If you don't get up to drink the medicine, you'll turn stupid from the fever. You'll be even more stupid than me. Get up." This fellow scolded her every day that she was stupid. She was the real stupid one, all right. He was already so sick. How could he still dream? No matter how anxious Mu-Ling was, Jinzi did not move. He looked at her, and as he looked, he started to laugh foolishly. Mu-Ling was about to die from anxiety. But seeing him laugh, she couldn't help but take another look at his eyes. This fellow who never smiled, why did he look so good when he smiled? Especially those eyes. "Get up." Mu-Ling used all her strength to pull and pull at Jinzi. After a long time, she still could not move him. Seeing that Jinzi was still looking at her and laughing foolishly, she was about to go crazy. She simply took the medicine and drank a big mouthful. She decisively lowered her head and kissed Jinzi's lips, passing the medicine over. Jinzi froze. He was originally still in a daze, but this time, he immediately sobered up. He was forced to accept it and drank a big mouthful of medicine. Mu-Ling let go of him, and very quickly, she fed him another mouthful. In this way, the big bowl of medicine was fed 5 times by Mu-Ling, and it was finally finished. Mu-Ling heaved a sigh of relief and was wiping away the stains on the corners of her mouth. Who knew that Jinzi suddenly stretched out his hand and held her neck, pressing her down and kissing her lips. Mu-Ling had not even regained her senses when he went straight in and deeply entangled with her, becoming incomparably lingering. Only God knew how deep this kiss was. Mu-Ling did not even have the chance to struggle. She could only allow Jinzi to wantonly demand until he was satisfied. Her first kiss had been snatched by him, and she had also been forcefully kissed by him before. But it was not as intense and deep as this one. Not only did Mu-Ling not have the chance to struggle, she even felt that she could not take it. He was too passionate, too forceful, and too emotional. She could not even tell if he was demanding from her or giving to her. When Jinzi let go of Mu-Ling was lying on top of him, panting. Her red lips were swollen, and her face was flushed red. She was completely dazed. Jinzi licked his lips and looked at her as if he was looking at his prey. He could not wait to pounce over and eat her again. The moment she met his devilish gaze, Mu-Ling threw a punch at Jinzi's chest. "Bastard, so I'm not dreaming." Jinzi could not help but chuckle. You're pretending. You did it on purpose. You lied to me to feed you medicine." Mu-Ling was so angry that her face turned red and she wiped her lips with all her might. But Jinzi's gaze suddenly turned ruthless. Cold, he said, "Mu-Ling, I really don't have any strength now. Otherwise, I'll definitely eat you up." Mu-Ling was so frightened that she fell to the side. She turned around and was about to escape when Jinzi asked indifferently, "Why did you come back to save me? I thought that after you left, you wouldn't care about me anymore." She had bumped into Feng Ying's matter. She even boiled the medicine and came back. Chapter 1298. Faced with Jinzi's question, Mu-Ling turned around and said something that Jinzi would never forget for the rest of his life. She said, "Jinzi, you were almost raped by that woman. I thought about it. You saved me after all. I can't let you be defiled by others." Jinzi was dumbfounded and could not speak for a long time. Mu-Ling was not stupid. She had taken Jinzi's pulse and knew very well how sick he was. Moreover, she had only left for a short while. Jinzi could not have seduced that woman. It was obvious that the woman had thrown herself at him. She ran out of the door and stood there for a while before she figured out what had happened. She wanted to go back, but when she saw the tigers approaching, she knew that Jinzi would be fine. Thus, she hurried to brew the medicine again. To the seriously ill Jinzi, medicine was the most important thing. When she came out with the medicine, she saw a pool of blood and a human skeleton in the snow. She had always been timid, but when she saw that scene, she was not afraid at all. She did not feel that it was cruel. Instead, she felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. She felt that she had become bad. Jinzi had a lot to say, but he did not know what to say in the face of Mu-Ling's answer. He only felt humiliated, angry, and helpless. In the end, all the words he wanted to say were reduced to 2 words: "Come here." Mu Ling did not move. She asked, "How are you going to go to the mysterious continent after killing that woman? How are you going to find your hometown?" "Come here, and I'll tell you," Jean Z said calmly. Mu Ling did not go over. Instead, she grabbed the medicine bag on the ground and ran out without a word. She did not run far. She stood at the door and raised her head to let the cold wind hit her face to wake her up. Her lips were still swollen and painful. His breath lingered on them. She touched her lips gently, her heart beating faster. Her heart was even more chaotic than before. She really did not know what to do with him. She was getting more and more clueless. She did not even realize that she had unknowingly lost her previous decisiveness. She did not go anywhere. She only went to brew a new batch of medicine. She boiled the medicine and sent it to the tent, only to find that Jean Z was asleep. She carefully touched his forehead, checked his temperature, and then took his pulse. After making sure that his condition was better, her hanging heart finally relaxed. She nudged him. "Hey, get up and take your medicine." She thought that it would take a long time for him to wake up. However, when she pushed him, he opened his eyes. He was pretending to be asleep again. She frowned as she looked at him. Her tear-stained face made her look like an old woman. This time, he didn't pretend. He struggled to sit up, took the medicine from her, and drank it in big gulps. After drinking all the medicine, he said, "You're here again? I thought you wouldn't come back again." He hadn't even asked her why she had come back. She gave her answer first. "Since I've saved him to the end. So, we're even now, right?" "No." He smiled weakly. "You were the one who begged me to help you. Today, I didn't force you to save me. The two of us cannot be reconciled." Actually, she was just saying it casually. She knew very well that he was so smart that he wouldn't agree to it. The two of them remained silent. The sky was still dark, and this was the coldest time. There was no heater in the tent. Mu Ling sat for a while, and her hands and feet started to feel cold. She unconsciously rubbed her hands together. "I'll lend it to you." Jean Z grabbed his fur robe and threw it to her. Mu Ling did not reject it and wrapped herself tightly in the fur robe. The two of them fell silent again. They sat like this and waited for dawn. Some people said that the darkness before dawn was always unusually long. Mu Ling realized that this saying was true. She waited and waited, but time passed very slowly. The sky in the grassland was still dark. She was already wrapped in a fox fur robe, but why was it still so cold? The cold air kept rising from her feet, and she was so cold that she shivered. Finally, Jean Z broke the silence. Coldly, he said, "Mu Ling, I'm giving you one last chance. If you come over, I'll consider this night as repayment to me. Otherwise, I'll really charge you interest." Mu Ling looked up, her gaze guarded. Jean Z sneered. "If you fall ill from the cold, who's going to brew medicine for me? You know that I can't do anything now." Mu Ling's mood was originally very heavy, but after hearing his words, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. He didn't have much strength, so he really couldn't bully her. Despite laughing, Mu Ling still didn't move. She asked pitifully, "Then will you still marry me?" This woman was insatiable and wanted a yard after getting an inch. Jean Z had said so many times that he would marry her, but when had he ever been serious? He was afraid that he had completely lost to her. He said no. Mu Ling still didn't go over. She stuck out her pinky. "Pinky promise lie. If you lie, you'll lose every bet." Jean Z very straightforwardly made a pinky promise with her and swore a deadly oath. Mu Ling finally felt at ease. She took off her outer robe and obediently crawled over, sneaking into the warm blanket. This night, she had already planned for the worst, but she didn't expect it to turn out like this. As long as she waited until daybreak, she and Jean Z would be even. Mu Ling lay on her side, allowing Jean Z to slowly approach her from behind. However, when Jean Z came over and hugged her, her heart instantly skipped a beat. She then remembered that Jean Z wasn't wearing any clothes. Jean Z covered her mouth with one hand, while the other held her waist tightly. She was really frightened and struggled desperately. However, Jean Z somehow had the strength to imprison her tightly. She couldn't struggle at all. Very soon, Jean Z whispered something in her ear, making her quiet down. He said, "Mulinger, you'd better not move. Otherwise, I'll go back on all my promises to you." Mulinger's struggle came to an abrupt end. Jean Z's legs wrapped around her, entangling with her. Two people, two hearts, like two long threads, entangled into a ball, becoming more and more inextricable and unable to merge back into one. Muling didn't move, and Jean Z didn't move either. However, he leaned close to her ear and whispered. He said, "Linger, I like you. I like you very much." He said, "Linger, you're so stupid. Why do I still like you?" He said, "Linger, if I met you first, would you have belonged to me?" He said, "Linger, do you know how it feels to like someone? I don't want to give up even if I die, unless I see her in pain." Linger, is Gu very happy and not in pain at all? So, you didn't give up? He must like you, right? Linger, I give up. Be happy, don't cry anymore. He sighed softly. Linger, don't be so stupid to agree to things like that in the future. You have to cherish yourself, understand? He chuckled. Gu came out of seclusion a few months ago and headed north. He should be going to the mysterious continent. You can leave when the sun rises. I've already paid off the debt of that gold card. I'll stay in Winter Crow. Remember, don't come here again. After he finished speaking, he let go of her. The sky was bright. The darkness before dawn was so long, but why did dawn always come so suddenly? Why did the whole world become so bright without anyone noticing? Muling slowly sat up and looked outside. Only then did she realize that her vision was all blurry and she couldn't see any light. She touched her face and realized that she was crying. Her face was full of tears. Jean Z was still in his original position, lying on his side. Muling sat in a daze and kept wiping her tears. However, she didn't know why, but the more she wiped, the more tears came. It was as if there was no end to them. In the end, she couldn't help burying her head in her knees and sobbing loudly. Why was she in so much pain? Why was it that she was free? Why was it that they didn't owe each other anything? Why was it that she could leave? Why was it that they would never meet again? Why was it that she knew where Chi brother had gone? But why wasn't she happy at all? Why couldn't she stop crying? What did it feel like to like someone? Would she not give up even if she died, unless she saw the other person in pain? But she didn't see Chi brother in pain. She didn't see Chi brother unhappy. But she had also given up. She had already given up 2 years ago. She liked Chi brother so much. So why did she give up? She hated Jean Z so much. So why was she crying now? Muling was crying uncontrollably. She refused to leave and didn't say a word. Jean Z frowned as he looked at her. He didn't know what to do. She cried when he forced her to stay. She cried when he let her go. What should he do to make her happier? He suddenly shouted, "Muling, don't cry. Go. Get out." Would she only wake up if he was more fierce? Muling suddenly looked up and asked in a choked voice, "Jean Z, why did you scheme against me? Why did you bully me? Why did you force me?" If it wasn't for the scheme at Three-Way Black Market, would she have resented him? Would she have made him owe such a huge debt? If he didn't bully her, would she have owed him so much? "I'll apologize to you, all right?" Jean Z was irritated by her crying. "I won't force you anymore. I won't force you ever again. You can leave." Who knew that Muling cried even harder. "Jean Z, you've always forced me. Always forced me. Why didn't you force me to the end? Why? Why did you make me so miserable? Jean Z, I've given up on Chi brother. I don't want to like anyone anymore. It's really tiring to like someone. I don't want to be so tired. I'm fine all by myself. So why did you bully me? Why did you force me to see you? Why did you say so much to me? Why did you like me? Why?" Muling cried her heart out, as if all the forbearance that she had endured all this time had burst out. Rather than saying that she had given up on Chi brother, it was more accurate to say that she had been abandoned. She had been abandoned a long time ago. She had never been liked. It was just that her reaction was too slow. It took her a few years to understand. She was like a lovelorn patient who had been in unrequited love. She had never been loved and had never been in love, but she had experienced the pain of love. Jeanzy, Chi brother isn't in pain at all. How can I give up on him? How can I? How can I give up on him? I've liked him for so many years. How can I? She cried and looked at Jeanzy. She was in a mess and in pain, but she also blamed herself. Jeanzy's heart ached so much that he couldn't speak. He didn't expect this girl to be so stupid. Why not? He asked angrily. Mulinger, what do you owe him? Why not? Liking someone isn't a responsibility. Loving someone isn't a responsibility either. Marrying someone is a responsibility. Mulinger, I regret it. I want to marry you. As he spoke, he suddenly pulled Muling over and pressed her under his body. Muling was still crying, but he kissed her wildly. Chapter 1299. Muling, if I force you, I can make you wake up from your endless and hopeless persistence. I'm willing to be the bad guy. I'm willing for you to hate me forever. Jeanzy's kisses fell crazily onto Mulinger's face and body. As he kissed, he tore off Mulinger's clothes. He cherished her so much and had never thought that he would end up in this state. The crazy tearing, crazy kisses mixed with her bitter tears, devouring her whimpers time and time again. He tore off all her coverings and stuck close to her body. Seeing her tear-filled and dazed appearance, he wished he could just barge into her and ruthlessly stab her to wake her up. But in the end, he didn't. He lifted her chin and kissed away the tears by her eyes, forcing her to look at him clearly. Mulinger, look at me. Look at who I am. I want to marry you. Look at me clearly. Even if he forced her, he would first tell her that he would marry her. He overturned the hurtful words he had said earlier. Mulinger, I don't want any clean woman. I only want you. Our debt has long been settled. This time, I owe you. He kept on saying, even though her softness made him extremely restless, but he still stubbornly said it clearly. Mulinger, you definitely don't know how much Jeanzy cherishes you and how much he wants to marry you. But now he can't do it. This just who was the one who forced who. This just who was the one who owed who. Mulinger, did Jeanzy owe you a debt in his past life? Or did he owe Gu a debt? Why did he have to be tortured like this? Mulinger, did you hear that? Mulinger, look at who I am clearly. Jeanzy was still saying. But Mulinger suddenly pressed his head down and took the initiative to kiss his lips. She had never been like this before. She was extremely clumsy, but with just 2 or 3 moves, she had easily provoked all of his impulses, making him unable to endure it any longer. The restlessness was driving him crazy. However, even at this point, he still endured it. Just like a child, stubbornly demanding an answer from her. He pushed her away and asked loudly, "Do you remember what I said?" Mulinger held his face and choked out. Jeanzy, say that again. I want to listen to it again. Goldie was stunned. He had so stubbornly wanted an answer, but when she asked so soberly, he was caught off guard. He looked at her and was speechless for a long time. She waited quietly. You can't love, but you can be loved. As long as someone was willing, as long as someone didn't mind that she used to love like that. Goldie, as long as you don't suffer, I'll accept it. Mulinger said from the bottom of her heart. At this moment, thousands of words, including the word marry, were all turned into one sentence. Goldie said helplessly, Mulinger, I like you. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her. He kissed all of her beauty. Her body was just like her, so good. When he hardened his heart and penetrated her, she said, Goldie, I'm sorry. She didn't know if he had heard her or if he had understood what she meant. He stopped on top of her and resisted the urge. He used his kiss to soothe the pain of her first time. When her body stopped trembling, he began his journey. He conquered the highest point again and again, wishing that he could penetrate her soul and see if his name was there. When he lost all his strength and laid completely on top of her, the whole world seemed to have quieted down. One thought to heaven, one thought to hell. One thought to stay together, one thought to part forever. One thought to love, one thought to pain. Who would be consigned to eternal damnation with a single thought? Whose one wrong thought was whose eternal life. The thought before dawn was to never meet again. The thought after dawn was to marry you. In this world, the most difficult thing to repay was love. If it wasn't about love, persistence, the past, or the future, could he be happier? Seeing that she was in pain and giving up, that was love. Seeing that she was in pain and giving in, that was also love. Love was never about first or second, only about length. After a long period of silence, Jean Z finally spoke up. Mu Linger, is this a dream or not? No. Mu Linger was very sure. Why? Goldie asked. Because I've never dreamed of you, Mu Linger said honestly. Goldie was calm. That might be in my dreams. He always dreams of you. You've had such a dream? Mu Linger asked seriously. Jean Z stared blankly for a moment before laughing out loud. That's not true. Mu Linger heaved a sigh of relief. He suddenly asked gently, Does it still hurt? She blushed and turned her head away. After a while, she said, It doesn't hurt anymore. He was silent. She immediately said, You're already sick. Why? She couldn't continue. So he immediately continued, It's all thanks to your medicine. Both of them seemed to be afraid of each other's silence. She hesitated and asked, Goldie, we were like this. Will we have a child? Do you want a child? Goldie asked. Yes. Mu Linger had always been honest. When she saw that Sister Jing was pregnant, she wanted a child. Whose child do you want? Goldie asked again. Mu Linger hesitated. Back in Tiger's prison, she had always pestered Sister Jing with questions. She wanted Chi Brother's child. She had thought about it several times. Before Mu Linger could reply, Goldie asked with a smile, Goose? I'm sorry, but from today onwards, you won't have the chance anymore. Mu Linger had been looking away, but when she heard Goldie's words, she looked over and stared straight into his eyes. Goldie's smile froze. In the end, he avoided her gaze instead. He moved away from her and resumed his usual coldness. He said, Mu Linger, no matter who you like, there's no turning back for you. Mu Linger didn't say anything. She kept looking at him. She only regained her senses after he finished dressing and went out. The herders had been scared away by the beasts. They didn't know where they were hiding. They stayed here for 5 days. Mu Linger brewed medicine for Goldie on time for 3 consecutive days. Goldie's health was good to begin with, so he recovered very quickly. They didn't do anything. During the day, they stayed in their own tents. At night, he would always come to find her and hug her to sleep. However, he didn't bully her anymore. On the 6th day, seeing that Goldie had fully recovered, Mu Linger said, I want to go back to the snow mountain to wait for you, Hughie. Goldie didn't say anything. He summoned the big white tiger to bring her back from the back of the mountain. He left some silver and took away the bed of lamb fur. The two of them stayed on the snow mountain. Neither of them mentioned Gu again. They didn't talk about whether they liked him or not. He had thought that she would be very quiet, and she had thought that he would be very cold. However, for some reason, the two of them would quarrel at the slightest provocation and cause trouble at the slightest provocation. However, no matter how fiercely they quarreled or how many questions they asked, both of them were very conscious and didn't touch on the word love. He took care of all 3 meals a day, including washing the dishes. Even if the ingredients were limited, every meal could be changed. While she was studying the snow jade grass, he would hang out with a group of tigers. Occasionally, he would find wild game on the snow mountain for her. He would boil a bowl of hot soup and bring it to her, forcing her to stop what she was doing and drink it all. She had been looking forward to spring, looking forward to the arrival of Yu Hughie. However, gradually, she hoped that this cold winter could last a little longer. It turned out that one could be very happy even if one didn't care about true love. It turned out that one could live well with someone bickering and making one angry every day. Spring still arrived. Groups of Yu Hughie arrived as scheduled. Mu Linger was stunned as she hid in the house. So beautiful, so beautiful. Goldie walked closer and stood behind her for a long time. Suddenly, he hugged her. She was slightly stunned, but quickly got over it. Other than sleeping at night, he would never touch her during the day. Even at night, he would only hug her. After that time, he didn't force her again. What was wrong with him today? Actually, she was already used to being hugged by him every night. Mu Linger's attention returned to Yu Hutie. However, she heard Goldie's gentle voice in her ear. Linger, Yu Hutie will be the matchmaker. Will you marry me? He took out a gold card. Mu Linger thought it was her own card at first glance, but she knew it wasn't. He said, "This is my only gold card. It's a betrothal gift. It's not much, but you can get it in advance from Kingon Bank. I'm willing to repay your debt for the rest of my life." His name was Goldie. Even his betrothal gift was so tacky. However, Mu Linger was so touched that she wanted to cry. Were the two of them destined to never be able to repay each other's debt in this lifetime? Mu Linger accepted the gold card. "I'll marry you." After the snow melted, Goldie and Mu Linger went down the mountain and returned to the northerly barracks. Goldie prepared a grand wedding for Mu Linger. Tang Li kept his promise and gave a generous dowry for Mu Linger. Han Yunxi also prepared a dowry for Mu Linger as a princess. Goldie personally wrote the invitation and did not leave out Gu's copy. The invitation was sent to the Medicine Ghost Valley. It was not known if the people from a Medicine Ghost Valley had sent the invitation to Gu. In short, everyone was present at the wedding 1 month later except for Gu. No one knew how Mu Linger was related to Goldie, and no one dared to mention Gu. But Goldie took the initiative to ask Long Fei Yi, "Your Majesty, why is Prince Yu not here?" Long Fei Yi replied, "Other than his own wedding, he will not attend other people's wedding." When these words came out, Tang Li could not help but laugh. Isn't that so? He also did not appear at Grand Tutor Gu's wedding. Mu Linger suddenly turned around and looked over. This time, everyone was quiet. Goldie did not evade. "It is not that I did not invite him, but he did not give me face." Everyone was shocked, but Mu Linger said, "Chi brother is a stingy person. He gave a gift to Grand Tutor Gu, but did not give me one." This time, everyone was even more shocked. Everyone avoided Gu Qixiao's name, but these two didn't mind at all. What was going on between them? At this time, Su Donglin flew in with a long brocade box in his hand. "Goldie Darren, His Highness Prince Yu sent someone to send you a congratulatory gift." Seeing that brocade box, Han Yunxi, Mu Linger, Gu Beiwei, and Qin Min all had a complicated expression. This brocade box was so familiar. Chapter 1300. The wedding gift that Gu gave to Jin Zi and Ling was a brocade box. Han Yunxi and the rest recognized this brocade box because it was exactly the same as the one that Gu had given to Gu Beiwei at his wedding. Han Yunxi and Mu Ling had peeked inside the box. As the recipient, Gu Beiwei had naturally seen it. As for Qin Min, when she was living in Yuning, there were no servants in the Grand Tutor's residence. She had personally helped Gu Beiwei tidy up the house a few times and had seen this gift box. Driven by curiosity, she had also peeked inside. Tang Li and Ning Jing were very curious. One must know that Gu's gift was definitely not ordinary. Long Fei Yi was not interested in Gu's gift, and his thoughts were not on the wedding banquet. He had been waiting for Ning Cheng's gift. He was here for the person who stood him up. Although Jin Zi did not give Ning Cheng an invitation on the surface, no one knew if he had secretly invited Ning Cheng. Ning Cheng and Jin Zi could be said to have been friends since childhood. Would Ning Cheng not come to Jin Zi's wedding? In any case, even if Ning Cheng didn't come, he should have sent a gift, right? As long as he caught the person who sent the gift, Long Fei Yi would have many ways to find Ning Cheng. He did not care if Ning Cheng stayed or left. He had to fulfill the promise that he had made to him. Jin Zi received the gift and said coldly, "I will have to trouble Imperial Bodyguard, Su, to thank His Highness Prince Yu on behalf of us." As he spoke, he was about to open the brocade box in front of everyone. "Don't open it." Han Yunxi and Mu Ling said at the same time. Gu Beiwei was as calm as ever, as if he had never received the same gift and did not know what was inside. Qimin did not say anything and just looked on. The two of them could be considered to have calmed down at the same time. "Why?" Jin Zi asked suspiciously. Because Mu Linger spoke for a while, but couldn't come up with a reason. Fortunately, Han Yunxi was quick-witted and she hurriedly explained, The wedding is not over yet. Why are you in such a hurry to open the gift? Hurry and send the bride to the bridal chamber. If the auspicious time is missed, it would not be good. Unfortunately, this excuse could not convince Jean Z and instead aroused his curiosity. If it was anything else, Jean Z wouldn't pay much attention to it, but he really wanted to take a look at Gu Qixiao's gift. Therefore, he ignored Han Yunxi and Ling, and suddenly opened the brocade box. At this moment, Mu Ling closed her eyes. Han Yunxi was speechless, and Gu Beiyue pulled the corners of his mouth, faintly embarrassed. Qin Min secretly glanced at Gu Beiyue and decided to continue acting dumb. Jean Z stared at the brocade box with a complicated expression and did not speak for a long time. The wedding was grand, and the wedding banquet was grand. There were 3 banquets on the prairie and countless bonfires. However, there were only the few of them in this tent. The bustling outside turned the night in the prairie into a sleepless night. However, Jean Z's silence made the tent exceptionally quiet. Mu Ling, ears started to turn red. She scolded Jean Z in her heart. What are you looking at? Haven't you seen enough after looking at it for so long? Why aren't you closing the lid? Can't you just act as if nothing happened? Unexpectedly, Jean Z suddenly turned to look at her and casually handed the box over. Mu Ling, this is not a wedding gift. It's from Gu. Mu Ling, blurted out in shock, and her entire face instantly turned red. What was Qi brother doing? Causing trouble? Han Yunxi held her forehead with one hand. She did not know what to say to Jean Z. Gu was messing around. Could it be that Jean Z was going to mess around too? If he wanted to show that kind of thing to Ling, he would have a hide in the bridal chamber. Where would Ling, put her face in front of everyone? Jean Z handed the box over to Mu Ling, with both hands. Jean Z was too tall and Mu Ling, was too short. Even though the box was in front of her, she still could not see it. Of course, she did not dare to look. She hurriedly closed the brocade box before accepting it. Aren't you going to open it and take a look? Jean Z asked coldly. Mu Ling, was angry. What did this guy want? She was about to fly into a rage when Jean Z said indifferently, I've prepared a dowry for you. Although it's late, you should still open it and take a look. When he said this, everyone was shocked. Mu Ling, could not help but stare with her mouth agape. Dowry? How? Mu Ling, hurriedly opened the brocade box and saw a letter lying in the brocade box. There were 2 big words written on the envelope. Dowry. This was Qi brother's handwriting. She could recognize it at a glance. She took out the letter and saw a small medicine bottle lying quietly in the brocade box. She was very, very familiar with this small medicine bottle. This small medicine bottle was given to him when she gave him the life-saving medicinal pills. She lied to him and said that there were life-saving medicinal pills hidden in it, and that he should only open it when he was in a life-and-death situation. In fact, this small medicine bottle not only hid her most precious pills, but also her confession note. At that time, she had childishly hoped that Qi brother would be able to understand her feelings while he was still alive. Now that she thought about it, Mu Ling wanted to laugh. Why was she so stupid back then? Qi brother was such a smart person. How could he not see through her? Did he return the small medicine bottle to her? Did he even look at what was inside? What kind of dowry was this? Was he going to give her a clear rejection on her wedding day? Besides Mu Ling, no one else present knew that this small medicine bottle originally belonged to Mu Ling. Jean Z said indifferently, Did he give you medicine? Mu Ling, looked up and her eyes met Jean Z's beautiful eyes. His eyes were filled with seriousness and curiosity. She could see through his persistence at a glance. She knew that he wanted to know what was in the bottle. The look in his eyes made her heart ache uncontrollably. She didn't want to open it or explain. She didn't want Jean Z to see it. She didn't know how to answer in front of so many people. She didn't want to embarrass him. Her heart ached. Just as she was at a loss, Jean Z suddenly took the small medicine bottle and opened it. At this moment, Mu Linger's tears were about to fall. But she saw Jean Z pour out a pile of golden sand from the bottle. There were no pills or confession notes, but a bottle full of golden sand. extremely, extremely precious and priceless golden sand. It was even exquisite, soft, pure, and resplendent. Under the light of the lanterns, it shimmered with a faint golden glow, making it incomparably luxurious and beautiful. Now this was gold, the purest form of gold in all of Cloud Realm continent. Jin Z, Mu Ling blurted out in shock. Jin Z was surprised as well. As soon as Mu Ling said Jin Z, he looked up and realized she was talking about the golden sand in his hands. Jin Z disdained Gu as a person, so he disdained Gu's gifts as well. But looking at the golden sand in his hands, he couldn't help but admire it. Not to mention his sincerity, it was really not easy to find an entire bottle of it. The crowd was surprised to see Jin Z's hands full of gold as well. Han Yunqi couldn't help but laugh. Ling, do you like your Qi brother's dowry? Before Mu Ling could answer, Tang Li kicked up a fuss. Ling, do you like your Qi brother's gold? As soon as he finished speaking, Ning Jing viciously stomped on Tang Li's foot. Would this fellow die if he didn't open his mouth? Ning Jing had almost gone crazy from Mu Ling's pestering back in Tiger's prison. She knew very well how Mu Ling used to feel for Gu. If Ling still hadn't given up, then Tang Li's words were like rubbing salt on her wound. Tang Li felt the pain from the stomp and didn't dare to make another sound. Unexpectedly, Jin Z asked, Mu Ling, do you like it? Mu Ling looked at him without replying. Immediately, the atmosphere grew tense again. The adults were all scared witless, especially Han Yunqi. She still didn't know why Ling was getting married. She was truly afraid of this foolish, impulsive girl. She was afraid that she'd get married on impulse, afraid that Gu's gift would make her impulsive again and ruin the wedding. Love could be a matter of one person. It could be impulsive. However, marriage could only be a matter of two people. Impulsiveness would hurt. Mu Ling was really quiet for a long time. She seemed to be sitting on an important decision that needed to be considered very carefully. After such a long time, not only was Han Yunqi anxious, but everyone else was also nervous. Ning Jing gave Han Yunqi a few glances, but Han Yunqi couldn't do anything. Ning Jing was annoyed and stepped on Tang Li even harder. Who asked him to talk too much? Who asked him so bluntly? Who asked him to make things difficult for Ling Who asked him to give Jin Z a chance to ask Ling like that? Tang Li endured the pain and couldn't wait for Mu Ling to speak quickly. If Mu Ling didn't speak, Ning Jing wouldn't let go of his foot. Everyone was anxious, but Jin Z was very calm. He slowly put the golden sand into the small medicine bottle and waited patiently. If Mu Ling was willing to seriously think about this problem, even at the wedding, he could still wait patiently. Wait for her to think it through. Wait for her to think it through. After putting the golden sand back into the bottle, Jin Z hesitated and simply opened the letter in front of everyone. When he opened it, he realized that the letter was actually for him. There was only one sentence in the letter, but Jin Z looked at it for a long time. The sentence was, Jin Z, my sister is honest, stupid, and ignorant of the world. I hope you can forgive and love her. I'm very grateful. The signature was Brother Gu. Jin Z was stunned for a long time before he recovered. He didn't know why, but his heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Previously, no matter how much Mu Ling hurt him, he had never felt so uncomfortable. To be exact, it was heartache. This letter was so warm, but at the same time, it was also extremely cruel. This warm request meant that Mu Ling was completely rejected by Gu. Looking at Mu Ling, his heart actually ached more than his heart ached. This poor thing was rejected and abandoned. However, he still forced a smile. Just like before, he laughed without a care in the world. He presented the letter to her and said jokingly, Mu Ling, look, Gu really doesn't want you anymore. You can follow me from now on. I'm still willing to take you in. The people around them couldn't see what was written on the letter, but when they heard Jin Z's words, they all frowned, including Long Fei Yi. How much did he like her that he was willing to force her? Mu Ling looked at Gu's handwriting. As she looked, tears fell. She looked up at Jin Z and muttered, Jin Z, Don't force yourself, okay? No. Jinzi decisively interrupted her fiercely. But, Mu Ling, seemed to be frightened and cried even harder. But Chi brother didn't want me 2 years ago. I don't want him anymore. Jinzi was stunned. Chapter 1301. Mu Ling, I didn't want Gu. 2 years ago, Gu had left without saying goodbye. Later, at Rui first birthday party, Gu had appeared again. He had lost the bet to Mu Ling. Could it be that he hadn't kissed Mu Ling? No one could have imagined that the words, "Don't want Chi brother," would come out of Mu Ling's mouth. How much courage and determination did this require? After all, this little girl had been chasing Gu for more than 10 years. How much pain did she have to endure before saying these words? It was said that those who were abandoned were the most painful. In fact, many times, those who chose to give up were far more painful than those who were abandoned. To Gu, there was no such thing as giving up. If he had never wanted her, how could he give up? If he had never admitted it, how could he be given up? However, to Mu Ling, at the same time that she was given up, she also chose to give up. Mu Ling, couldn't stop crying once she started crying. She said, "Jinzi, I think I like you. Be happy. Don't force yourself, okay?" How long had Jinzi been waiting for this sentence? How long had Mu Ling been thinking about this question? At this moment, everyone seemed to have seen a grown-up Ling. One had to know that she hadn't chosen Jinzi at the most painful time. She had been in pain for 2 years. Even at the wedding, she was still thinking in pain. She didn't compromise? She didn't compromise with Jinzi to heal her wounds. It was said that the only person who could heal a love wound was another lover. However, Ling said that she didn't want Chi brother anymore 2 years ago. Her love wound had stopped 2 years ago. All the pain she felt when facing Jinzi might not have anything to do with Gu, but only with herself. It was related to whether she could still love, whether she was willing to love, and whether she dared to love. Jinzi frowned as he looked at Mu Ling, who was crying harder and harder. Suddenly, he pulled her over and kissed her fiercely. No answer was as real, direct, and convincing as kissing her. A fierce kiss, passionate and wild, selfless and affectionate. Mu Ling unconsciously responded to Jinzi. This was the first time she was so unburdened. She wholeheartedly immersed herself in his aura and everything about him. This was also the first time she felt so close to this man. There was no longer a sense of distance between them, nor would he suddenly give up on her. "Goldie, you didn't give up on me. That's the greatest mercy that I, Mu Ling have received in my life." Han Yunxi and the others exchanged glances and quietly retreated. Rui, and Tang Tang were staring at Tang Li's feet that were stepped on by Ning Jing. As soon as Ning Jing let go of Tang Li, the two little guys looked away. Little Tang Tang was more than 3 years old. She was very pretty and looked like a porcelain doll. She said softly, "See, my mother is much fiercer than my father. My mother has the final say in our family." Rui, was more than 2 years old. He looked more and more like Long Fei. His eyes were lively, and there was an innate air of nobility between his brows. He didn't say anything. He patted his hands and knees seriously and stood up. His expression and actions were just like a little adult. He was clearly a year younger than Tang Tang, but he was more mature than Tang Tang. He was like Tang Tang's older brother. However, as soon as he stood up, he saw Jinzi and Mu Ling kissing. In an instant, all of his mature facade was shattered, and a perplexed expression appeared on his immature face. He was very curious and muttered, "What are they doing?" When Tang Tang saw this, she immediately screamed and hurriedly covered her brother's eyes. "Shame! Don't look." Only then did the adults remember the two children playing at the side. Han Yunxi and Tang Li couldn't help but laugh. Long Fei Yi immediately carried Rui and strode away. Ning Jing covered Tang Tang's eyes and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You already know how to be shy. What are you still looking at?" "Yes." Tang Tang covered her brother's eyes while she stared at the two shy adults. Everyone went out. Lil Thing suddenly fell from the beam. It couldn't stop laughing and rolling on the ground. Another embarrassing incident for the little master. Every time it saw little master embarrass himself, it was like seeing Long Dada embarrass himself when he was young. It was simply too happy. With little master's temperament now, his temper would definitely be similar to Long Dada's in the future. When that time came, if someone could tell little master these embarrassing incidents when he was young, how would little master react? Lil Thing looked back and saw that Miss Ling, and Jean Z were kissing too intensely. It couldn't help but shudder and hurriedly ran out. It immediately jumped onto young master's shoulder. It inadvertently glanced at Qin Min beside young master, but there was no hostility. It didn't know the relationship between young master and Qin Min. It only knew that young master wasn't with Qin Min on the day of his wedding. Young master and Qin Min had been acting all along. On the way from Yuning to the Northern Li military camp, young master and Qin Min were in the same carriage, but the distance between them was very far. Their words and actions were very polite and improper. No matter how tired young master was, he didn't lie down in the carriage during the journey. Qin Min was the same. She always leaned on the bed and dozed off. Even if there was a high pillow beside her, she didn't casually lean on it. Lil Thing jumped a few times on young master's shoulder and jumped onto Qin Min's shoulder. Qin Min tilted her head and gently scratched Lil Thing's chin. Lil Thing enjoyed it and intimately rubbed against her hand. Lil Thing liked Qin Min very much because she was so obedient. Jean Z's subordinates arranged a new tent for Long Fei Yi and the others to continue the banquet. Normally, Jean Z, the bridegroom, should come out to entertain everyone. Moreover, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi, the two masters, were still at the banquet, so Jean Z couldn't leave. However, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi didn't say anything, so the people below didn't dare to care about the rules. As for those who wanted to disturb the bridal chamber, they didn't dare to take the initiative to make trouble when they saw that Jean Z stood the emperor and empress up and didn't come to serve them personally. At night, the wedding banquet was still lively. Mu Ling, and Jean Z had already been sent to the bridal chamber by the matron of honor. The couple sat on the bed and continued the ceremony according to the matron of honor's instructions. The matron of honor was found by Jean Z, and this wedding ceremony was requested by Jean Z. He was a prodigal son without a family, but he couldn't wrong Mu Ling in terms of etiquette for such a big event as a wedding. He wouldn't leave her out of anything that others should have. The wedding ceremony lifted the red veil, ate the sweet soup, and drank the cross-cupped wine. The matron of honor smiled and whispered a few words to Jean Z before leaving. Jean Z personally went to send them off and locked the door. Mu Ling, shy face was covered with a faint blush. Under the festive red light in the room, she looked especially dainty. But the most beautiful moment was when she raised her eyes to look at Jean Z, and that moment of shyness. Just now, she was almost suffocated by this man's kiss. Fortunately, the matron of honor interrupted them and sent them to the bridal chamber. Jean Z walked over, squatted down in front of her, and held her hands. Both of them were silent. It seemed that they were used to arguing with each other and were not used to such a sudden silence. After a long while, Jean Z said, "I won't compromise. I'm serious." Of course, Mu Ling knew what he was talking about. She said, "I'm sorry to have made you wait so long." "Fortunately, it's less than 3 years," he said lightly. "Are you really not going to the mysterious continent?" She wanted to ask this for a long time. "No, it's fine. It's quite good now," he answered. "Why?" She didn't understand. "You're too stupid. You're not suitable there." He meant what he said. From Feng Ying's words, his background was definitely not simple. He could control the tiger tribe, but Feng Ying could. The people of the black tribe couldn't control them either. There must be a reason behind this. Since he was young, he had seen how constrained and helpless Ning Cheng was when he shouldered the mission. He didn't like it, and Mu Ling wasn't suitable there either. It was quite good now. Moreover, he couldn't really lose Northern Li after marrying Mu Ling. Wouldn't Ning Cheng hate him for the rest of his life? "You're stupider than me, okay." Mu Ling said unhappily. Jean Z raised his eyebrows and looked at her with disdain. Mu Ling saw his gaze and frowned. You're bullying me right after marrying me. If I'd known earlier, I wouldn't have married you for the rest of my life. Jinzi coughed lightly and said, Muling, I don't think I've done anything to you yet, right? Are you regretting it already? What else do you want to do to me? Muling was angry. It was one thing for this guy to call her stupid for no reason, but what else did he want? What did his not going to mysterious sky have to do with her being stupid? At most, he knew how to tame beasts. In terms of martial arts, they were all considered mediocre. Jinzi stood up. Muling wanted to stand up as well, but before she could stand firm, she was pushed onto the couch by Jinzi. He pressed down on her and propped his hands on either side of her. He looked down at her and said very honestly, Muling, I've tolerated you for a very, very long time. Muling originally thought that Jinzi was going to bully her, but when Jinzi said that, she was confused. What did he tolerate? Hey, I haven't provoked you recently, right? What did you tolerate? Say it out loud, she asked angrily. Jinzi was instantly speechless. Muling grabbed his collar and said, Speak clearly. Jinzi really didn't want to say those words, but he had to. He said word by word. Muling, how stupid are you? Ridiculous. Muling really didn't understand. Jinzi looked at her confused little face and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he could only control his temper and leaned down to whisper in her ear. What did he tolerate? After tasting meat, he couldn't eat the beauty in his arms every night. If he wasn't tolerating her, then what was he doing? Muling was enlightened, and the redness in her ears spread to her entire face. Meanwhile, Jinzi was already nibbling on her ear and kissing it. Unlike that night in the grasslands, Jinzi was especially gentle tonight. Tonight, Muling was especially awake. She carefully felt his touch and personally experienced all the questions that she had been curious about. So this was what it felt like. When Jinzi's big hand gently reached in and covered her sensitivity and softness with incomparable gentleness, she finally couldn't feel it clearly anymore. She couldn't help but cry out, unable to bear it. If that night in the grasslands was painful, uncomfortable, painful, numb, and scared, then at this moment, she was only greedy. She was greedy for every touch and every kiss he gave her. It must be because of love that she could be so unrestrained and so beautiful. Only when he truly became one with her would he feel so close to her. Only then would he feel that he truly possessed her. Jinzi, from now on, Linger is yours. You have to be happy. Chapter 1302. The scenery of the grasslands at the end of spring and the beginning of summer was as beautiful as Jiangnan's. The stream gurgled, the water plants were plump, the grass was long, and the orioles were flying. The meadow was full of small flowers of various colors. Although it was unknown, there were large patches of them. Regardless of whether it was close up or from afar, they were very beautiful. The entire land seemed to be covered with a carpet of flowers. Walking on the grasslands in spring and galloping horses were as beautiful as Jiangnan's flowers and poems. Unfortunately, Han Yunxi was pregnant and could only sit in a carriage. Long Fei, the son of heaven, was actually acting as her coachman. Little Rui sat beside Long Fei Yi, looking up at the eagles circling in the sky. Little Tang Tang was in her father's arms, while Gu Beiyue and Qin Min each rode a horse, walking side by side. As for Mu Ling, and Ning Jing, they didn't look like women at all. They waved their whips in front and ran wildly, competing to see who would reach the front of the hill first. Han Yunxi sat behind Rui, and asked with a smile, Rui, do you think your Annie Jing or Annie Ling will win? Rui answered without thinking, Imperial Mother, do you want to bet? Long Fei Ye's lips curled into a smile, but he didn't say anything. Bet on what? Han Yunxi asked quickly. Rui said, no. Why? Are you afraid of losing? Han Yunxi tried to provoke him. Rui didn't answer. You really don't dare? Your imperial father is laughing up his sleeve at you. Han Yunxi grinned. Rui didn't answer. Long Fei had long been laughing. Although Rui was young, His judgment was excellent. If he could do it, he would definitely do it. If he couldn't do it, no matter how tempting or provocative he was, he wouldn't do it. When he didn't know how to answer his mother, he wouldn't say anything. If she wasn't familiar with his habits, she wouldn't know what he was thinking. Han Yunqi knew her son's temperament, so she didn't say much. She turned to look at Gu Beiwei and Qin Min. When Long Fei Yi and Rui sat together, they looked even more alike. At this moment, both father and son were looking ahead with cold and aloof expressions. They were imposing without being angry and did not put on airs. They both had their own dignity. On the other hand, Tang Li and little Tang Tang, who were not far away, were the complete opposite. The father and daughter were very excited. "Dad, hurry up, charge. Mother is about to lose." Little Tang Tang shouted anxiously as she pointed to the front with both hands. "Hurry up." Tang Li held his daughter with one hand and waved the whip with the other. He sped up and chased after her, saying in a low voice, "With me here, your mother won't lose. Don't worry." Little Tang Tang was stunned and looked back. "What? You're wrong. With your Aunt Ling here, your mother won't lose." Tang Li laughed. "Let's go. Ning Jing, hurry up." Little Tang Tang immediately looked forward again. "Mother, you can't do it." Tang Li quickly brought little Tang Tang to Ning Jing's side and ran side by side with her. Ning Jing glanced at the father and daughter before continuing to look forward with all her might. Tang Li brought little Tang Tang along and followed beside her. When Tang Li said, "Jing Jing," little Tang Tang shouted, "Charge." When Tang Li said, "Ning Jing," little Tang Tang shouted again, "You can do it." When Tang Li said, "Madam," little Tang Tang shouted, "Mother." "No." Tang Li immediately corrected her. Little Tang Tang immediately corrected herself and shouted, "Mother." Only the father and daughter chased after Ning Jing and bombarded her with shouts. Ning Jing was originally focused and pulled away from Mu Ling. However, after being disturbed by the father and daughter, she really couldn't concentrate. Gradually, Mu Ling caught up. Just as Tang Li shouted, "Madam," passionately, Ning Jing was instantly overtaken by Mu Ling and fell behind. Finally, Ning Jing couldn't take it anymore. She turned back to look at Tang Li and her daughter. When she saw the smile on Tang Li's face, Ning Jing wanted to whip him and send him flying. However, when she saw her daughter's excited expression, her heart softened and she smiled helplessly. Sometimes, Ning Jing would secretly think that it was actually quite good that she couldn't have another child. With Tang Li, the chatterbox, and Tang Tang, the little chatterbox, if there was another one, she would definitely break down. She didn't turn back and continued to chase with all her might. However, she was already very close to the finish line, but she didn't catch up. Mu Ling was first, and she was second. Little Tang Tang was a little disappointed, but Tang Li carried her and chased after them, laughing loudly. "Ning Jing, you're second. Your daughter and I are last." Little Tang Tang was stunned, but she quickly got up and stood on the horse's back. She turned back and smiled at Ruth and the rest who were about to come over. They're last. In this kind of competition, would Long Fei Yi be last if he took it seriously? Impossible. What about Gu Beiwei? Gu Beiwei could take first place even if he didn't ride a horse. Looking at her daughter from head to toe and seeing her optimistic smile, Ning Jing's mouth twitched. She didn't know what her daughter would become if she continued to hang out with Tang Li. Jinzi had arrived at the foot of the hill ahead of time. He had already set up the tent and the fire. At this time, he was setting up the iron rack and preparing to barbecue. Seeing that Mu Ling had won, Jinzi didn't have much of a reaction. He casually threw a towel to Mu Ling and lowered his head to fiddle with his barbecue meat. "Sister Ning, thank you for letting me win." Mu Ling smiled brightly. "Your equestrian skills have improved a lot." "Did Jinzi teach you that?" Ning Jing asked jokingly. She didn't know if it was because Mu Ling was already a married woman or something else, but Ning Jing felt that this girl looked different, but she couldn't tell what was different. Han Yunqi came over and was immediately attracted by the aroma of the barbecue meat. She was so hungry that she couldn't look away. Thinking back, she only found out that she was pregnant when she was disgusted by the barbecue meat. Now, looking at the barbecue meat, she didn't feel disgusted at all. Instead, her appetite was very good. As soon as she walked in, Gu Beiwei said from the side, "Your Highness the Empress, you can't." Han Yunxi glanced over and didn't have a chance to refute. Long Fei Yi had already grabbed her hand and said in a low voice, "Rest in the tent. You've been on the carriage for half a day. Su Donglin will send your lunch over later. Be good and listen to him. If you let Su Donglin give you special treatment again, I'll definitely chop off his hands." Although Long Fei spoke in a low voice, everyone still heard him. They all looked towards Han Yunxi, including Jin Zi, who'd been bowing his head the entire time. Han Yunxi wanted to find a hole to hide in. Ever since she was diagnosed with the pregnancy pulse and was sent back to Yuning, she had been living a non-human life. Long Fei Yi asked for a small booklet from Tang Li. It recorded all kinds of taboos and supplements. Long Fei Yi strictly followed all the rules in the booklet. Whether it was in the palace or out of the palace, there were no exceptions to her 3 meals. He said he would make it up to her. He said he would accompany her. Why did it turn out like this? However, she had to admit that this pregnancy was far less relaxed and flexible than the last time. She didn't know if it was because she was old or if she had eaten and slept too much that she had become stupid. She was only about 5 months pregnant, but her belly was very obvious and very big. When she walked, she would unconsciously use her hand to support her waist. "Sister, I'll go in with you." Ling quickly came over to support her. However, Jin Zi suddenly asked, "Grand Tutor Gu, other than barbecued food, what else can't you eat when you're pregnant?" Mu Ling was shocked and instinctively looked at her flat belly. Although she didn't eat much barbecued food, she liked other things such as fried, braised, or barbecued food. She especially liked spicy food. When she was making medicine, if she didn't eat until she was full, she wouldn't be able to concentrate. Gu Beiwei said indifferently, fried, braised, and barbecued food. It's best to have a light taste, less sour and less spicy. Jinzi nodded and didn't say anything. However, Mulinger felt uncomfortable all over. After Jinzi tormented her last night, she even told him that she hoped that the baby would come quickly. Now, it seemed that she had to seriously consider it. When Ning Jing saw Mu Ling's expression and recalled what she said in Tiger's prison, she couldn't help but want to laugh. She also went over to support Han Yunxi. They were about to enter when Han Yunxi turned around and looked. "Qin Min, come over and rest. Don't just stand there." After Qin Min dismounted, she stood beside Gu Beiwei and was especially quiet. "Yes, Your Majesty." She curtsied. Her polite manner was exactly the same as Gu Beiwei's. On the way from Yuning to Bailey, Han Yunxi spoke a few times, but in the end, she was too lazy to continue. The women had all entered the tent to chat, so it wasn't appropriate for Long Fei and the rest of the men to enter. Tang Li moved to Jin Zi's side and learned how to barbecue meat from him. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiwei sat at the side, watching and whispering. As for Rui and Tang Tang, they had already chased the little thing far away. As Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiwei chatted, they looked up at the snowy mountains in the west and asked indifferently, "Lord Jean, how about we flatten Winter Crow's slave camp next year?" In Winter Crow, from the nobles to the slave traders, there were slave camps that imprisoned countless slaves. The prison of the slave camp was the beginning of Jin Zi's memories in this life. Jin Zi's hand stiffened slightly, but he quickly continued to flip the meat. He said, "How many men will Your Majesty give this humble subject? How many do you want?" Long Fei Yi asked. Jin Zi finally looked up and said seriously, "I'll report after I think it through." In the tent, Han Yunxi, Mu Ling, and Ning Jing were all sitting lazily. Only Qin Min sat upright, her back straight like a well-bred young lady. Han Yunxi and Mu Ling had just finished telling Ning Jing about Qin Min's legs being poisoned. As for Qin Min's miscarriage, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi still pretended not to know anything. Now, everyone thought that Qin Min had lost her child and was recuperating. They also knew that she and Gu Beiwei had adopted a foster son in Ningzhou City, whose nickname was Shadow. Han Yunxi originally thought that Qin Min would become familiar with everyone after sitting for a while, but who knew that Qin Min would sit quietly without saying a word. The three of them chatted and laughed. Qin Min would laugh with them, but she didn't interrupt. Finally, Han Yunxi couldn't help but raise her brows and look at Qin Min. Mu Ling wanted to speak, but Ning Jing stopped her with a look. Han Yunxi looked at Qin Min with interest. Qin Min didn't panic, but she was a little uncomfortable. She asked, "Your Majesty the Empress, is there something on my face?" Han Yunxi shook her head and didn't say anything. Qin Min was suspicious. "Your Majesty the Empress has something to say to me?" Han Yunxi shook her head again. Qin Min couldn't help but laugh and asked directly, "Then why is Your Majesty the Empress looking at me?" Han Yunxi said, "Qin Min, why is it that the more I look at you, the more I feel like you resemble Gu Beiwei?" Chapter 1303. Qin Min didn't expect Han Yunxi to say that. She felt that Han Yunxi's words seemed to have a hidden meaning. However, she didn't think too much about it and continued to play dumb. Actually, she didn't want to pretend either. She couldn't wait to lie down on the couch and have a good sleep. She was so tired that every bone in her body felt uncomfortable from sitting in the carriage. Although she had slept in the tent for the past few days, she couldn't get enough sleep. Helplessly, she had to be alert at all times, just like the days when she lived in Yuning City. She was afraid that if she got familiar with the Empress and the rest, she would easily give herself away. Mu Ling was fine, but the Empress and Ning Jing weren't easy to deal with. They had sharp eyes. She had already ruined Gu Beiyue's plan because of a child. If her relationship with Gu Beiyue and her marriage were to be messed up again, she wouldn't be able to face Gu Beiyue in her next life. She still missed the days in Yuning City. She had been away for so long, and she didn't know how Little Shadow was doing. She originally wanted to bring Little Shadow here, but after thinking carefully for a long time, she gave up. If she was so uncomfortable, it wouldn't be convenient for Little Shadow to come. She couldn't let the child suffer. "Do they look alike?" Qin Min asked curiously. "They don't look alike, but their tempers are exactly the same." Mu Ling couldn't help but say, "Sister Min, tell us secretly. Did Gu Beiyue set the rules for you? You're not allowed to do that at home, and you're not allowed to do that when you go out?" Qin Min laughed. "No, he's just like me. It's just that." Mu Ling was easy to deal with, but the Empress and Ning Jing weren't. She answered while thinking about how to change the topic. In the end, she pretended to be shy and whispered, "It's just that I'm not allowed to eat anything." "You're not pregnant, so why can't you eat anything?" Mu Ling asked again. Qin Min said faintly, "I'm still recuperating. He's watching me closely, afraid that I'll be careless again." Only then did Mu Ling remember that Qin Min had a miscarriage. She immediately corrected herself. "Sister Min, Gu Beiyue's heart aches for you, and that's why he's watching over you. Look at how much my brother-in-law dotes on my sister. That's why he's also keeping a close eye on her." Mu Ling had just been quite depressed that Gu Beiyue was so talkative, causing her sister to not be able to eat barbecued meat and causing her to be banned from eating in the future. However, she knew that Qin Min did not have a miscarriage because she fell down on her own. She was afraid that Qin Min would blame herself and be unhappy if she brought up this topic, so she changed her words to comfort her. Ning Jing listened quietly. Han Yunxi knew what was going on, so she didn't say anything. "Actually, you don't have to be so secretive," Qin Min said calmly. At this point, Mu Ling successfully changed the topic. "Really?" Mu Ling was overjoyed. Qin Min said seriously, "After 3 months of pregnancy, you don't have to deliberately restrict your diet and daily activities. Sour and spicy, fried and roasted things, and if the ingredients are fresh, you don't have to ban them. It's okay to eat them occasionally to satisfy your cravings." But Gu Beiyue, Mu Ling didn't quite believe her. After all, Gu Beiyue was an authority in the medical field. Unexpectedly, Qin Min said, "You have to trust a female doctor when it comes to women's matters." Mu Ling was stunned for a moment before she laughed out loud. "That makes sense. That makes sense." Han Yunxi could clearly tell that Qin Min was deliberately changing the topic, but when she heard this, She felt as though she had found a soulmate. Although she wasn't an obstetrician, she knew that there was no need to be so particular about pregnancy. She just couldn't convince Long Fei Yi, and Gu Beiyue was on Long Fei Ye's side. She said teasingly, "Qin Min, when you go back tonight, tell your Gu Beiyue to help me put in a good word with Long Fei Yi." Qin Min smiled. "Your Majesty, this subject's wife will do her best." Mu Linger pursed her lips into a soundless smile, as if she could see her future days of eating, eating, and eating. Ning Jing was about to speak, but Qin Min hurriedly spoke first. She said to Han Yunxi, "Your Majesty, may this subject take your pulse?" Han Yunxi immediately reached out her hand. She'd heard Gu Beiyue say that Qin Min was a medical all-rounder who was a professional in all aspects. Moreover, she had her own set of acupuncture techniques that could cure many illnesses that couldn't be cured with medicine or took too long to heal themselves. Instead, her acupuncture techniques could cure them quickly. She just wanted to let Qin Min take her pulse and see if there was any difference between what Qin Min said and what Gu Beiyue said. Normally, Gu Beiyue would take her pulse every few days and give her a simple checkup while telling her things to take note of. However, this time, Qin Min took her pulse for a long time. At first, Han Yunxi was still calm, but when she saw Qin Min's cautious expression and silence, she began to feel uneasy. "My sister, what's wrong?" Mu Linger couldn't help but ask. Qin Min remained silent. After a while, she replied, "It's nothing serious." As she spoke, she suddenly approached Han Yunxi, and Han Yunxi whispered something. Han Yunxi looked incredulous. "Really, Your Majesty, we can verify it in about 5 months." Qin Min respectfully returned to her seat. "You?" Han Yunxi was very surprised. Qin Min only smiled and didn't explain. Ning Jing and Mu Linger were confused. Mu Linger panicked. "What are you whispering about?" Han Yunxi said, "I'm pregnant with a girl." "Ah." Mu Linger was shocked. Ning Jing was also extremely shocked. "Qin Min, you can even tell." Qin Min still looked like a well-bred young lady. She sat there upright, and even the way she placed her hands was very polite. She smiled faintly, and the feeling she gave people was so beautiful. She wasn't stiff or pretentious at all. That warm and sweet smile made people unconsciously think of the sunlight outside the tent. It was warm but not hot, bright but not dazzling. It was April, and the spring sun was warm outside the tent. The spring breeze was gentle, and the spring scenery was beautiful. Qin Min said with a smile, "Your Majesty, Madam Jing, Madam Ling, Qin Min is willing to make a bet with you." No one had ever made a bet with Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi didn't want to win. She only wanted to lose. She wanted to lose so badly. Long Fei Yi wanted a daughter so much. Wasn't she the same? "Bet, Qin Min, if you win." Han Yunxi thought for a very long time, but she was unable to think of any conditions. She asked, "What do you want?" Qin Min had been overjoyed the entire time. She was completely confident that the Empress was pregnant with a girl. The reason why she said it was purely to divert the Empress' attention and change the topic. However, she became serious when she heard the Empress say that. "Your Majesty, I have a request. I hope the Empress won't tell Beiyue." "Go ahead." Han Yunxi even wanted to replace Gu Beiyue and have Qin Min stay in the palace to do regular checkups for her. "Your Majesty, if I'm right, please let Beiyue rest well. I hope the Empress can let Beiyue recuperate more. He's a medicine pot, so he can't tire himself out too much," Qin Min said seriously. Last time when Gu Beiyue left the Ning province, she had taken Gu Beiyue's pulse. Gu Beiyue's body was actually extremely weak. Although she had not completely understood what was wrong with him, she knew that what he needed the most was rest. She also did not know whether he would soak in medicinal soup often after leaving the Ning province. His illness could not be delayed. The longer it was delayed, the worse it would get. He said it could be cured and that it would be fine, so she obviously believed him. However, she was afraid that he would be busy, afraid that he would drag it out, afraid that he would not cherish himself. He was the grand tutor of the crown prince. He was not just teaching a child, but the heir apparent of the great Qin, the person who would protect the great Qin in the future. He was also the head of the Imperial Academy of Medicine and Medical City. From the nobles to the commoners, he was responsible for the heavy responsibility of the Great Qin's medical treatment. All matters related to human lives fell on his shoulders. He was also the emperor's internal advisor. He secretly controlled a group of strategists to share the emperor's burdens and solve his problems. He did his best for the Great Qin. Although she did not know the real reason why he adopted Little Shadow, she knew that he wanted to have an heir, and it was related to the Shadow clan. He was also the only descendant of the Shadow clan. He had endless things to do. With his personality, why would he take the initiative to take a leave? Ning Jing and Mu Ling also knew that other than Long Fei Yi, Gu Beiyue was the busiest. They only thought that Qin Min was complaining that Gu Beiyue did not have enough time to accompany her. Han Yunxi, on the other hand, realized that Gu Beiyue needed to rest. Han Yunxi knew that Gu Beiyue was a medicine bottle. Okay, Han Yunxi agreed immediately. However, she secretly thought that when she returned, she would find a reason to give Gu Beiyue leave. Whether Qin Min won the bet or not, she had to do it. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi stayed on the grasslands for a few days. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue personally made a trip to Winter Crow. When they returned, they had a secret conversation with Jin Zi for an entire day. Long Fei Yi had made up his mind to take over Winter Crow's grasslands. He was just waiting for an opportunity. Although Han Yunxi was in charge of military affairs, Long Fei Yi did not let her worry too much during her pregnancy. She also did not ask much about Winter Crow. Instead, she asked about Yao City. Although Mu Ling was married, she was still concerned about the medicine administration. On the day that Han Yunxi and the others returned to Qi Chung Yuning, she had Jin Zi accompany her back to the Mu residence. Han Yunxi originally planned to discuss with Long Fei Yi on the way to give Gu Beiyue a leave of absence. Who knew that after traveling with them for a day, Gu Beiyue and Qin Min suddenly received a secret letter from Medical City's vice head Shun. Medical City's Qin family and Rin family had quarreled over a patient. Vice head Shun could not handle it and asked Gu Beiyue to hurry back as soon as possible. Your Majesty, Qin Min will go back with you. Gu Beiyue said seriously. No need. We'll take the official road. We can find a doctor along the way. Han Yunxi refused. Gu Beiyue simply wanted to leave Qin Min behind to take care of her. She was pregnant. She was not weak to the point where she needed a doctor to be on standby. If news of this got out, she would definitely become a laughingstock. Instead, it was Gu Beiyue. Since he was busy, having a woman to take care of him was better than nothing. Your Majesty. As soon as Gu Beiyue said that, Qin Min, who had been very quiet the entire time, interrupted him. She said, Beiyue, it's about time we dealt with the matter of the Qin family. This might be an opportunity. Exactly. Han Yunxi was about to mention this as well. Mu Ling had already returned to Medicine City. Now that the Great Qin's treasury was filled and the imperial might was awe-inspiring, it was time to break the monopolization of medicine by the two major clans in Medical City and Medical City. It's time. Long Fei nodded as well. Gu Beiyue glanced at Qin Min, but he said nothing more. Qin Min met his gaze and looked away in a hurry. She could not help but panic from her originally calm heart. She regretted it. When the carriage arrived at a fork in the road, it was already late at night. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had to head due south, while Gu Beiyue and Qin Min had to head southwest. After watching Long Fei Yi's carriage leave, Gu Beiyue turned around and said indifferently, First, Miss Qin, you must be tired from the past few days, right? Don't worry and sleep. I'll drive the carriage myself. Qin Min had already boarded the carriage and pulled down the curtains, but she still could not help herself in the end. She said softly, Principal Beiyue, there won't be a next time. I promise. She had said too much earlier. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.